Welcome back to another story on Horcruxes. This time, we're bringing you What If Harry Was Gilgamesh's Reincarnation? The movie your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1. The King in the Cupboard. The spider that lived in the corner of the cupboard under the stairs had been there longer than Harry. He knew this because he remembered the day they'd shoved him inside for the first time, a squalling toddler, too young to understand why the big people with the red faces didn't want him, and the spider had already built its web between the shelf and the wall. That was 10 years ago. The spider was probably dead. Spiders didn't live that long. But there was always a web in that corner, and Harry chose to believe it was the same one. He was lying on his back on the thin mattress, arms folded behind his head, staring at the underside of the staircase. Dust motes drifted through the sliver of light that crept beneath the door. Upstairs, Dudley was screaming about something, the television probably, or the wrong flavor of ice cream, or the fundamental injustice of having only one mouth with which to eat. Harry closed his eyes. He could smell the Euphrates, not literally, he knew that. He was 11 years old, lying in a cupboard in Little Winging, Surrey, and the nearest river was a drainage ditch behind the McAllister property that smelled like petrol. But somewhere behind his eyes, in the space where dreams lived before they became memories, he could smell it, the river at dawn, the scent of reed and silt, and the faint sweetness of date palms. He could feel sunlight on his face, real sunlight, not the anemic English thing that licked through clouds, but the hammering golden heat of Mesopotamia. He could hear them chanting his name. Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, he who saw the deep. The memories had started when he was 6. Or rather, that was when they'd stopped being dreams and started being something else. He'd been hiding in the garden shed after Dudley's gang had chased him through the neighborhood, crouched behind a bag of fertilizer with his heart slamming and his knees skinned, and then like a dam giving way he'd seen it all, the ziggurat rising against the desert sky. The great walls of Uruk, 300 towers, each one built by his command. An arena of men and beasts and the roar of a crowd that worshipped him because he was not merely a king but something more. Something forged by the gods themselves, 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal, and every inch of him burning with a vitality that made the world feel thin around him. He'd sat in that shed for 3 hours. When he'd finally walked back into the house, Aunt Petunia had screamed at him about his muddy shoes, and he'd looked at her, really looked at her, and she'd stopped mid-sentence. Something in his eyes had changed. She never could say what exactly, but she'd taken a step backward, and for a moment the kitchen had been very quiet. That was 5 years ago. The memories had been filling him like water filling a vessel ever since, not all at once. That would have broken him, and he knew it. Whatever mechanism governed this, fate, magic, the architecture of the soul, it had the good sense to parcel the knowledge out in portions a growing mind could absorb. First came the feelings, the bone-deep certainty that he was more than what this house and these people told him he was. Then the images, the throne room, the treasury. The endless armory of weapons and artifacts gathered across a lifetime of conquest, each one a noble phantasm, each one a treasure without equal. Then, when he was 8, came the grief. He'd woken in the middle of the night with tears streaming down his face and a name on his lips that he hadn't spoken aloud in 5,000 years. Enkidu. He'd pressed his face into the pillow and wept silently. He'd learned to do everything silently in this house, and the loss had been so vast, so total, that for a while he'd thought it might actually kill him. Not the memory of it, the reality of it, because these weren't someone else's memories. That was the thing he'd understood even at 6, even before he had the language to articulate it. He wasn't watching a movie of some ancient king's life, he was remembering his own. The soul that looked out through Harry Potter's green eyes was the same soul that had once looked out through Gilgamesh's red ones, and the grief of losing Enkidu, his equal, his other half, the only being in all creation who had been made specifically for him. That grief was a wound that apparently even reincarnation couldn't heal. He'd spent a week after that barely able to function. Aunt Petunia had assumed he was ill, and in a rare display of something adjacent to humanity, had left him alone. Uncle Vernon had complained about the cost of keeping a sick freeloader, but even he had the survival instinct to not push too hard when Harry looked at him with those eyes. By 9, the tactical knowledge had come. How to read a battlefield, how to assess the worth of a man in the first 3 seconds of meeting him, how to project authority with posture, with silence, with the precise calibration of when to speak and when to let the absence of speech do the work. He'd practiced on Dudley's gang, not with cruelty. Cruelty was the weapon of the weak, but with a calm, unflinching confidence that made 12-year-old boys suddenly discover they had somewhere else to be. By 10, the power had started to manifest, not the magic. He'd always had that. Strange things had happened around him since infancy, and even Aunt Petunia, for all her vicious denial, knew it. Things moving on their own, Dudley's toys breaking in improbable ways. His hair growing back overnight after one of Petunia's more aggressive attempts at grooming. No, this was different. This was the gate. He'd been washing dishes, one of his many assigned chores, when Vernon had come in drunk and mean and grabbed him by the back of the neck. A big hand, meaty and hard, squeezing with the intent to hurt. And Harry had felt something inside him open. Not his magic, not exactly. Something deeper. A door in the architecture of his soul that connected to a space that was his and his alone. The Gate of Babylon. The treasury of the King of Heroes, containing every treasure, every weapon, every artifact he had gathered across a lifetime that had become legend. For a single heartbeat, the air behind him had rippled like the surface of a golden pond, and Vernon had yanked his hand back with a yelp, staring at his palm where the skin had gone red and raw as if he'd grabbed a hot stove. "What did you do?" Vernon had sputtered, eyes wide, cradling his hand. "What did you do, boy?" Harry had turned around, dish towel still in hand, and looked up at his uncle with an expression that did not belong on a 10-year-old's face. It was the expression of a man who had decided not to kill something and wanted the thing to know it. "Don't touch me again," Harry had said. Vernon hadn't. Now, on the morning of July 31st, his 11th birthday, not that anyone in this house would acknowledge it, Harry lay in his cupboard and took stock. He was Gilgamesh. He was Harry Potter. He was both, and he was becoming something that was neither, a synthesis, a new thing built from the collision of two lives separated by millennia, but joined by the same soul. He had the memories and instincts of the greatest king who ever lived, and the body of an undernourished 11-year-old boy in oversized hand-me-down. The dissonance was at times almost funny, almost. The letterbox rattled. Harry heard the soft thump of mail hitting the floor. He listened as Vernon's heavy footsteps went to the door, the shuffle of envelopes, and then a silence, a specific kind of silence, the kind that'd wait. "Petunia." Vernon's voice was a strangled whisper. Harry sat up in his cupboard, head cocked slightly. "Petunia, come here." The whispered conference in the hallway was brief and frantic. Harry could have gotten up and pressed his ear to the door, but he didn't need to. He could hear them perfectly well from where he sat. Another gift of whatever he was becoming. His senses had been sharpening for years. Not supernaturally, not yet, but in the way of someone whose body was slowly remembering what it was supposed to be capable of. Addressed to the cupboard, "Vernon, the cupboard, they know where he sleeps. We won't have it. We agreed, we swore, it's come, it was always going to come. She was one of them and he's one of them and he's not going, I won't have it. I won't have some freak school." Harry reached out and opened the cupboard door. Vernon and Petunia startled like he'd fired a gun. They were standing in the hallway, hunched over an envelope that Vernon was gripping with both hands, and when they looked at him, he saw it, the fear they'd carried for 11 years. Not fear of him exactly, fear of what he represented, the world they'd tried so desperately to pretend didn't exist. "That letter is mine," Harry said. "Now you listen here." Vernon started, drawing himself up, and Harry simply looked at him. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't narrow his eyes. He just looked, and something in that gaze, something ancient and absolute and utterly unimpressed, hit Vernon Dursley like a wall of cold water. The big man's bluster died in his throat. His mouth worked, no sound came out. "It's addressed to me," Harry said, walking forward. "I'll take it." He held out his hand, his fingers were steady. His posture was straight, and despite being 4'9" and wearing a t-shirt that could have fit two of him, he occupied the hallway like he owned it. Like he owned the house and the street and the whole dreary suburb. Vernon looked at his wife. Petunia's face was white. She was staring at Harry with an expression he'd seen before, the expression of someone recognizing something they'd spent years trying to forget. She was seeing Lily, probably. Everyone always said he had his mother's eyes. But what Petunia saw in those eyes now was something Lily had never possessed. "Give it to him, Vernon," Petunia said quietly. "It won't matter. They'll come whether we like it or not." Vernon's hand shook as he handed over the letter. Harry took it, turned it over, and read the emerald green address. "Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey." He cracked the seal and unfolded the parchment. "Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry Headmaster, Albus Dumbledore, Order of Merlin, First Class, Grand Sorc, CHF, Warlock, Supreme Mugwump, International Conft. Of Wizards, dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." Harry read the letter through twice, then folded it and slid it into his pocket. So, magic was real, or at least magic as these people understood it was real. This was not a surprise. He'd known since he was 6 that power existed in this world, power that went beyond the mundane. What he hadn't known was that it was organized, institutional, a school, a headmaster, a curriculum. The idea of being taught magic by strangers was both amusing and slightly insulting. He was the king of heroes. He had once possessed the prototypes of every noble phantasm ever created. The idea of sitting in a classroom and learning to turn matches into needles was, he stopped himself, that was Gilgamesh thinking. Pure undiluted Gilgamesh, the arrogance of a demigod who had once held the world in his palm and found it wanting. Harry knew better. Harry had learned in 11 years of cupboards and cruelty and the slow excavation of an ancient soul that arrogance without understanding was just noise. He didn't know this world yet. He didn't know its rules, its players, its threats. And the letter told him one crucial thing. Someone knew where he was. Someone knew he slept in a cupboard. Someone had been watching. A king without intelligence was just a man in a crown. "I'll be attending," Harry said to Vernon and Petunia, who were still standing in the hallway like they'd been nailed to the floor. "I'll need supplies. The list is included. I assume there's a way to acquire them." "We won't pay for it," Vernon managed. "We won't spend a penny on this nonsense." "I wasn't asking you to," Harry said and walked past them into the kitchen. The letters kept coming. Harry had said he'd attend, but Hogwarts apparently operated on the assumption that the Dursleys would try to prevent it, because over the next several days, the volume of correspondence escalated with a persistence that was almost comical. Letters in the mail, letters slipped under the door, letters stuffed inside eggs. Vernon, driven to increasing heights of panic, boarded up the letterbox, nailed the mail slot shut, and finally, on a rain-lashed Sunday, loaded the entire family into the car and drove them to a godforsaken rock in the middle of the sea. Harry sat in the back of the car through the entire ordeal, watching Vernon's escalating madness with the detached interest of a man observing an insect try to fight a windshield. He could have stopped it at any point. Could have simply told Vernon that resistance was pointless, that whoever was sending these letters clearly had resources and determination that no amount of boarding and fleeing could overcome. But there was something instructive in watching the Dursleys flail. It told him about the psychology of denial, about the specific flavor of fear that drove ordinary people to extraordinary stupidity. Besides, he was curious about who would come. They were on the rock. The shack was freezing and stank of seaweed, and Dudley was sleeping on the sagging couch while Vernon snored in the one bedroom. Petunia was a thin, anxious shape in the darkness. Harry lay on the floor, his back against the cold stone, and watched the minute hand on Dudley's cracked watch crawl toward midnight. 5 minutes, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom. The door didn't just open, it came off its hinges. It fell inward like a drawbridge, and the wind howled through the gap. And there, filling the doorway, enormous and wild-haired and absolutely unmistakable, was a man who had to be at least 8 feet tall. Vernon came stumbling from the bedroom with a rifle. Where had he gotten a rifle? And Petunia was screaming, and Dudley had rolled off the couch and was hiding behind it, and the giant man stepped inside, picked up the fallen door, and jammed it roughly back into the frame. "Couldn't make us a cup of tea, could ya?" the giant said, wringing water from his beard. "It's not been an easy journey." He looked around the shack, his beetle-black eyes sweeping over the cowering Dursleys, the miserable fire, and then finding Harry, his entire face transformed. A huge, bushy smile broke through the beard. His eyes went bright and wet. "Last time I saw you, you was only a baby," the giant said, his voice suddenly thick with emotion. "Ye look a lot like your dad, but ye have got your mum's eyes." Harry looked up at the man and felt nothing from Gilgamesh. No recognition, no warning, no instinctive assessment of threat, just a very large man who was genuinely, almost painfully happy to see him. "You're from Hogwarts," Harry said, not a question. "Right you are." "Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts." The giant Hagrid lowered himself onto the couch, which groaned in protest. He was pulling a squashed box from inside his enormous coat. "Got some at fur, yeah. 'Fraid I might have sat on it at some point, but it'll taste all right." He handed Harry the box. Inside was a chocolate cake, slightly lopsided, with green icing that read "Happy Birthday, Harry." Harry stared at it. He was the king of heroes. He had ruled the greatest city in the ancient world. He had fought gods and monsters, and walked the road to the cedar forest and held Enkidu as the life left them. He had seen wonders that would break the minds of ordinary men. No one had ever made him a birthday cake. "Thank you," Harry said, and his voice was very quiet. For a moment, just a moment, he wasn't Gilgamesh at all. He was just a boy who'd been given his first cake by a stranger who cared. Hagrid beamed. Then Vernon ruined it, because that's what Vernon did. He came forward waving his rifle and blustering about how Harry wouldn't be going. Absolutely not. He'd put his foot down. He wouldn't have it. They'd sworn when they took the boy in that they'd stamp this nonsense out of him. "You knew," Harry said. The room went quiet, not silent. The storm still raged outside and the fire still crackled, but the quality of the air changed. Everyone felt it. Even Dudley, who had the emotional sensitivity of a parking bollard, peered over the back of the couch with wide, nervous eyes. "You knew I was a wizard," Harry said, looking at Petunia. You knew about this world, about my parents, about what I am. Petunia's mouth was a thin, hard line. Her eyes darted to Hagrid, to Vernon, back to Harry. Something behind her expression was crumbling. Your mother was a witch, Petunia said, and the word came out like she'd been holding it behind her teeth for a decade. She got her letter just like you. Off she went to that school, and came back every holiday with her pockets full of frog spawn and turning teacups into rats. My parents were so proud. Lily this, Lily that, a freak, that's what she was. And then she met that Potter man and they went and got themselves blown up and we got landed with you. Blown up, Harry said. Hagrid had gone very still. They didn't die in a car crash, Harry said. It wasn't a question. He'd never believed the car crash story. It had the feel of a lie, too neat, too convenient, too specifically designed to be uninteresting. Car crash, Hagrid's voice was almost a roar. A car crash killed Lily and James Potter. That's an outrage, a scandal. Harry Potter not knowing his own story when every kid in our world knows his name. Harry sat down on the arm of the couch. Expression hadn't changed. That was the thing that would have unnerved anyone paying close attention. An 11-year-old boy had just learned his entire life was a lie and his face was calm. Not blank, not suppressing emotion, but calm. The calm of someone who had suspected the truth and was now simply receiving confirmation. Tell me, Harry said, and Hagrid told him, about the wizarding world, about Voldemort, the name making Hagrid flinch, and the war, and the night he came to Godric's Hollow. About James and Lily Potter, who fought and died rather than step aside. About the killing curse that should have ended a baby's life but instead rebounded, destroying Voldemort's body and leaving nothing but a lightning bolt scar. Harry listened to all of it without interruption. Inside him, in the deep architecture of his soul where Gilgamesh's memories lived, something was turning. Not recognition, he didn't know this Voldemort, but the shape of the story was familiar. A tyrant, a dark power grown bloated on fear, a civilization too terrified to speak his name. And a prophecy or fate, or whatever you wanted to call the machinery of destiny, selecting one person to stand against it. He'd been that person before. He could be that person again. "It's Voldemort," Harry said when Hagrid had finished. "You said his body was destroyed, not that he died." Hagrid blinked. "Well, I mean, most people reckon he's gone, dead, finished, but you don't." Hagrid shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "Dumbledore's got his thoughts on the matter. I don't reckon he'd want me spreading them around." Dumbledore, the headmaster. Harry filed the name away. A man who had thoughts he didn't want spread around. A man who'd sent Hagrid instead of coming himself. Already the political instincts of a king were mapping the terrain. "He sent you to bring me." "Course he did. Yea, I've had your letter, Haven, yeah, we need to get your supplies. I'll take ye tomorrow to Diagon Alley." "Ye'll love it, Harry, wait till ye see." "I'll come," Harry said. "Thank you, Hagrid." He said it simply, without condescension, and Hagrid's face split into that enormous smile again. Whatever else was true, whatever games were being played, whatever plans were being laid, this man was genuine. Harry could read people the way a jeweler read gemstones, and Hagrid was solid all the way through. Not sharp, perhaps, not sophisticated, but loyal and honest and kind in a way that was almost painfully rare. Those were qualities a king valued. Diagon Alley opened before him like a wound in the world. One moment they were in a dingy pub called the Leaky Cauldron, which Harry was fairly certain served as some kind of gateway or checkpoint, and the next, Hagrid was tapping a sequence of bricks in a wall and the wall was folding open, and behind it was a street that shouldn't exist. A cobblestone lane crammed with shops and stalls and people in robes, alive with color and noise and the crackle of ambient magic. Owls swooped between chimneys. A stack of cauldrons gleamed outside a shop. A woman was haggling over bat spleens. Harry stepped through and felt the magic settle around him like a second skin. It was thick here, saturated. The air practically hummed with it. Inside him, the gate of Babylon stirred, not opening, not yet, but acknowledging. This was a place of power. Not the raw, wild power of the age of gods that Gilgamesh had known, diminished and diluted over millennia into something more structured, more codified, but power nonetheless. Hagrid led him through the crowd, and Harry observed everything. The shops, the people, the architecture, the social dynamics, who walked with confidence and who scurried, who met his eyes and who looked away. The street told a story if you knew how to read it, and Gilgamesh had been reading cities since before the concept of cities existed. Then the whispers started. "Bless my soul, Harry Potter." The first person to recognize him was a pale, twitchy man in the Leaky Cauldron who shook Harry's hand like he was pumping water from a well. Then another, then another. By the time they reached the street, word had spread and people were stopping and staring and pointing and pressing forward. Harry watched their faces. Awe, reverence, hope. These people looked at him the way the citizens of Uruk had once looked at Gilgamesh, like he was the answer to a question they hadn't dared ask, the boy who lived. Their savior, their symbol. He'd been a symbol before. It was a cage made of other people's expectations. "This way," Hagrid said, steering him through the crowd. "Gringotts first." "Yale need money." Gringotts was a white marble building at the end of the alley, and it was run by goblins. Harry knew goblins, or rather, Gilgamesh's memories contained echoes of similar beings, the crafters and hoarders of the ancient world, the keepers of treasure. He regarded the goblin at the front desk with open interest, not looking down at the creature as many wizards clearly did, but assessing it with the respect one professional gave another. "Mr. Harry Potter wishes to make a withdrawal," Hagrid said, then leaned in and whispered something about Dumbledore and Vault 713 that Harry filed away for later consideration. The goblin Griffook led them into the vaults. They rode a cart through a cavern system that went impossibly deep, the air getting colder and the magic getting denser, and Harry sat perfectly still as the cart rattled and dove. Hagrid looked green. Harry looked like he was mildly entertained. Vault 687. Griffook opened it, and inside, gold, mountains of it. Gold galleons and silver sickles and bronze nuts piled carelessly, filling the vault like the world's most ostentatious ball pit. Harry looked at it and felt a very specific emotion, amusement. This was a fortune by the standards of this world. He could see it in Hagrid's carefully averted eyes, in the way even Griffook's professional neutrality flickered. To them this was wealth, significant, substantial, impressive wealth. To the king of heroes who had once possessed the treasury of all the world's treasures, it was a nice start. "This was my parents'," Harry said. "Your family vault," Griffook confirmed. "The Potter estate has maintained accounts with Gringotts for 6 generations. 6 generations." Harry scooped coins into a bag with efficient hands. A goblin bank that had served his family for generations. A fortune in gold. A magical society that worshipped his name. And somewhere in the background, an old man with too many titles who was orchestrating his introduction to this world with the care of a chess player developing his pieces. Harry was beginning to see the board. They visited Vault 713, where Hagrid retrieved a small, grubby package that he stuffed into his coat with an attempt at subtlety that would have embarrassed a bull in a china shop. Harry watched this and said nothing, but he remembered it. The wand shop was last. They'd been everywhere else. Robes from Madame Malkin's, where Harry had stood on a stool being fitted while a pale, pointed boy on the next stool had talked about Quidditch and houses and bloodlines with the casual arrogance of minor nobility. Harry had listened politely and categorized the boy instantly. Insecure, performing a role desperate to impress. Aristocracy by inheritance rather than merit. He'd seen 1,000 like him in Uruk's court, books from Flourish and Blots, a cauldron, potion ingredients, a telescope. Harry had purchased everything on the list and nothing more, moving through the alley with a focused efficiency that left Hagrid slightly bewildered. Most 11-year-olds wanted to stop and gawk. Harry shopped like a general supplying a campaign, but Ollivander's, that was where he paused. The shop was narrow and shabby, and the magic inside it was dense. Harry felt it the moment he crossed the threshold. The air was thick with potential, with the residue of thousands of wands humming quietly in their boxes, each one a conduit for power, each one waiting. Inside him, the gate of Babylon thrummed in response. "Good afternoon," said a soft voice, and an old man materialized from the shadows between the shelves. Pale, silver eyes, wild white hair, an expression that was not quite a smile. "Mr. Potter, I've been expecting you." "Mr. Ollivander," Harry said evenly. "You have your mother's eyes." Ollivander was studying him with an intensity that went beyond the physical. Those silver eyes were seeing something. "It seems only yesterday she was in here herself, buying her first wand, 10¼ inches long, swishy, made of willow. Nice wand for charm work. Your father, on the other hand, favored a mahogany wand, 11 inches, pliable, a little more power and excellent for transfiguration." He was closer now, and Harry could see the slight tremor in his hands, the hungry curiosity in his gaze. This man felt magic the way a sommelier tasted wine. "Well, now, let's see." Ollivander pulled a tape measure from his pocket. "Which is your wand arm?" "Right." The tape measure began taking measurements on its own, wrist to elbow, shoulder to floor, knee to armpit, while Ollivander prowled the shelves, pulling boxes. Harry stood still and let it happen. The tape measure paused at his scar, hovering over it like a moth near a flame, and Ollivander's eyes sharpened. "I'm sorry to say I sold the wand that did that," Ollivander said quietly. 13½ inches. You, powerful wand, very powerful, and in the wrong hand." "The wrong hands indeed," Harry said, and his tone carried something that made Ollivander look at him again, really look, and for the first time the wandmaker's expression shifted from professional curiosity to something else. Something almost like recognition. "Try this one," Ollivander said, handing him a wand. "Beechwood and dragon heartstring, 9 inches, nice and flexible." Harry took it and felt nothing, no connection, no spark. He waved it and Ollivander snatched it back almost immediately. No, number try this, maple and phoenix feather, 7 inches, quite whippy. Nothing, the wand sat dead in his hand. No, here, ebony and unicorn hair, 8.5 inches, springy. Nothing, they went through wand after wand, the pile of discarded boxes grew. Ollivander, far from being discouraged, was getting excited. His eyes were brighter with each failure, his movements more animated, and Harry could see why. The wandmaker understood something that most people wouldn't. This wasn't a case of an unremarkable wizard being hard to match. This was something else entirely. Tricky customer, Ollivander murmured, but the word tricky carried a weight of fascination. Very tricky indeed, I wonder. He disappeared into the back of the shop and returned with a single dusty box, handling it with a delicacy that none of the others had received. Holly and phoenix feather, he said almost reverently. 11 inches, nice and supple. Harry took the wand, heat, not the warmth of connection that a normal wizard wand pairing might produce, but heat, golden, fierce, alive. It raced up his arm and into his chest, and for a heartbeat his vision doubled. He saw the shop, the old man, the dusty shelves, and superimposed over it, like a photograph overlaid on reality, he saw something else. Golden light, the suggestion of vast doors. A treasury that went on forever. The wand sang in his hand. He raised it and brought it down in a single clean arc, and a shower of gold and crimson sparks erupted from the tip, flooding the shop with light. The boxes on the shelves rattled, the windows hummed, and from the far corners of the room, buried under years and dust, other wands began to vibrate in their boxes, responding not to the holly wand but to the person holding it. A harmonic resonance like an orchestra responding to a conductor. Ollivander staggered back a step, the sparks faded, the rattling stopped. Harry lowered the wand and looked at Ollivander, and the wandmaker was staring at him with an expression that had gone far beyond curiosity into something close to awe. Curious, Ollivander whispered, very curious. You said that wand's core, phoenix feather, Harry said. What's curious about it? The phoenix whose tail feather is in your wand gave another feather, just one other. It is curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar. Harry absorbed this, a connection between his wand and Voldemort's, fate or coincidence or the universe's sense of irony. I think, Ollivander said slowly, we must expect great things from you, Mr. Potter. After all, he who must not be named did great things, terrible, yes, but great. Harry met his gaze. The King of Heroes looked out through a boy's green eyes, and Ollivander, who had spent his life reading the subtle language of magical power, saw something that he would never speak of to another living soul. Something ancient, something that predated wands and wizards and the very concept of organized magic, something that looked back at him from a depth he couldn't fathom. Voldemort's things were terrible, Harry said calmly. Mine will be something else entirely. He paid 7 galleons for the wand and walked out of the shop into the late afternoon sun of Diagon Alley, and behind him, Ollivander sank into his chair and sat there for a very long time, staring at nothing. The train was in a month. Harry used the time. He returned to the Dursleys because he had nowhere else to go yet, but the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Vernon gave him Dudley's second bedroom without being asked. Petunia stopped assigning him chores. They moved around him like planets orbiting a sun they were afraid to approach. Harry let them. Their fear was useful insofar as it bought him peace and quiet, and he needed both. He read his textbooks. All of them cover to cover in the first week. Not because the material was difficult, most of it was elementary, the equivalent of teaching arithmetic to someone who understood calculus, but because it told him about this world's framework. How these wizards conceptualized magic, their theories, their limitations, their blind spots. They used wands as focal points, spoke incantations in bastardized Latin, and organized their magic into discrete disciplines, transfiguration, charms, potions, defense against the dark arts. It was structured, codified, almost scientific in its approach. It was also, to Gilgamesh's senses, incredibly narrow. The magic of the Age of Gods, true magic, divine magic, the sort that had built the walls of Uruk and given life to Enkidu, operated on principles that these wizards had apparently forgotten or never known. It was wilder, deeper, more fundamental. It didn't ask the universe to do something, it told it, the difference between a request and a royal decree. But Harry wasn't arrogant enough to dismiss what he didn't fully understand. These wizards had survived for millennia. They'd built institutions, developed techniques, created artifacts of genuine power. The philosopher's stone, mentioned in his textbooks, was crude compared to the treasures of Babylon, but it was still an achievement. And there were clearly wizards of significant ability in this world. Dumbledore, Voldemort, others he hadn't yet encountered. He would learn their magic, he would master it, and then he would surpass it because that was what the King of Heroes did. He spent the evenings practicing. Not spells. The ministry apparently tracked underage magic, and he saw no reason to attract attention before he was ready. Instead, he practiced with the gate. He would sit cross-legged on his bed in the dark, close his eyes, and reach inward past the surface of his mind, past the layer of ordinary thought, down to where the golden doors waited. The Gate of Babylon was not a spell. It was not a magical technique that could be taught or learned. It was an intrinsic property of his soul, the repository of every treasure ever gathered by the King of Heroes, bound to him across death and rebirth. In his previous life, he could open it fully, fill the sky with golden portals, rain weapons upon his enemies like divine judgment. In this body, at this age, with this level of physical and magical development, he could crack it open, just a sliver, just enough to feel what was inside, and what was inside was everything. He could sense them. Thousands of noble phantasms, each one a weapon of legend, each one the prototype from which all subsequent versions had been derived. Swords and spears and axes and shields and artifacts of such concentrated power that even reaching toward them made his vision blur. They were there, they were his. But accessing them fully would require growth, physical, magical, spiritual. The body of an 11-year-old, however remarkable its soul, was not yet a sufficient vessel. That was fine. He was patient. He had been patient for 5,000 years. He could be patient a little longer. On the last night before September 1st, Harry sat by the window of Dudley's second bedroom and looked out at the suburban darkness of Privet Drive. Identical houses, identical lawns, identical cars. A world so aggressively normal that it had tried to sand him down to fit, and failed. Tomorrow he would board a train to a castle full of wizards. He would enter a world that thought it knew who he was, the boy who lived, the orphan savior, the child who defeated the Dark Lord through some miracle of infant magic. They would expect gratitude, humility, wide-eyed wonder. They would expect a boy. They were going to get a king. Harry closed his eyes, and behind the darkness of his lids, the golden gates gleamed. I am Gilgamesh, he thought. I am Harry Potter. I am the King of Heroes reborn, and this world, with all its wonders and all its terrors, is mine to claim. Not to own, not to dominate, but to protect. Because that was the lesson, wasn't it? The one it took Enkidu's death to teach, and a lifetime of grief to understand. Power without purpose is tyranny. Strength without love is just cruelty wearing a crown. I will do it differently this time. He opened his eyes. The streetlights of Privet Drive burned orange against the night. Tomorrow, the next chapter would begin. Harry Potter, Gilgamesh reborn, the king in the cupboard, the lion who had slept among mice and was finally waking, smiled. It was not a gentle smile. King's Cross Station was a monument to Victorian ambition, all iron and glass and the ghosts of a million journeys. Harry moved through the morning crowd with his trunk on a trolley and Hedwig, the snowy owl Hagrid had bought him as a birthday gift, riding atop it in her cage, her amber eyes surveying the commuters with regal disdain. Harry appreciated Hedwig. She had the disposition of someone who knew she was superior and didn't feel the need to prove it. Platform 9 3/4. The ticket said it plainly, and Harry stood between platforms 9 and 10, studying the barrier with interest. A concealment built into the architecture of the mundane world. Clever. He watched a family of redheads, loud, numerous, radiating warmth like a bonfire, pass through the barrier one by one, vanishing into the brick like ghosts. "Excuse me," Harry said to the mother, a plump, kind-faced woman who was herding the last of her children toward the barrier. "First time, do I just walk through?" "Oh, are you new, dear?" Ron's new too. "Look, just walk straight at the barrier between 9 and 10. Best do it at a bit of a run if you're nervous." "I'm not nervous," Harry said and walked through. The barrier dissolved around him like mist, and then he was on the other side, and platform 9 3/4 spread before him in all its chaotic glory. A scarlet steam engine belched white smoke into a vaulted ceiling. Families clustered on the platform, parents fussing, children shouting, owls hooting, cats weaving between legs. The noise was enormous. The magic was thick. Harry breathed it in and let himself feel, just for a moment, the simple excitement of beginning. Gilgamesh had begun 1,000 journeys. Harry had never left Surrey. Both parts of him agreed. This one felt significant. He boarded the train, found an empty compartment, stowed his trunk, and settled by the window. Hedwig dozed in her cage. The platform outside was thinning as the departure time approached, and Harry watched the last of the families say their goodbyes, mothers kissing foreheads, fathers squeezing shoulders, siblings punching each other with the casual violence of affection. He thought of Lily Potter, who had died to save him. He thought of James Potter, who had died to buy her time. He had no memory of them. The only parents he could remember were the echoes of Gilgamesh's divine blood and mortal obligation, a mother who was a goddess and a father who was a king, and neither of whom had been what you'd call warm. The compartment door slid open. Anyone sitting here? It was the youngest red-headed boy from the platform, tall for his age, gangly with a smudge of something on his nose. Everywhere else is full. Harry looked at him. Read him in 3 seconds the way Gilgamesh had read 10,000 men, youngest of many brothers, insecure, loyal by nature, brave without knowing it, hungry both literally and figuratively. Sit down, Harry said. The boy sat, hauled a battered trunk up onto the rack with effort, and turned to Harry with an expression of barely contained curiosity. I'm Ron Weasley, Harry Potter. Ron's eyes went wide. His gaze flicked to Harry's forehead, searching for the scar, and Harry, because he was in a generous mood and because the boy's transparency was almost endearing, pushed his hair aside to show it. Blimey, Ron breathed, so it's true. Do you really have the scar? Yes. Voldemort, yes. Memory of it. Number. Ron flinched at the name. You said it. It's a name, Ron. Names don't have power unless you give it to them. Ron stared at him. Harry could see the gears turning. This was not what the boy had expected. Harry Potter was supposed to be, odd, humble, grateful for attention. Instead, he was sitting with his legs crossed and his back straight, making eye contact with the steady, unhurried calm of someone who had all the time in the world and the authority to use it. Right, Ron said slowly. Yeah, I suppose that's yeah. He trailed off uncertain, and Harry took pity on him. Tell me about Hogwarts, Harry said. Your family, they've all been. That opened the floodgates. Ron talked about his brothers, about the houses, about Quidditch and ghosts and moving staircases, and the fact that his brother Charlie worked with dragons. Harry listened with genuine attention, asking precise questions, building a picture. Ron was informative without knowing it. Every story, every complaint, every throwaway comment about his family painted a picture of the wizarding world that textbooks couldn't provide. Social dynamics, power structures, cultural assumptions. You've got brothers in every house, Harry asked. Well, no, we're all Gryffindor, every Weasley for generations. Mum and Dad would be dead proud if I get in too, but what if I don't? What if I end up in? He lowered his voice. Slytherin, what's wrong with Slytherin? Ron looked at him like he'd grown a second head. It's Slytherin. Every dark wizard who ever lived was in Slytherin. You know who was in Slytherin? Every dark wizard, Harry repeated. All of them, no exception. Well, I mean, that sounds like a story people tell because it's simpler than the truth, Harry said, not unkindly, but tell me more about Gryffindor. Ron rallied, and by the time the lunch trolley came around, they had established a rapport that was not quite friendship. Harry didn't give friendship easily, and Ron could sense the distance without understanding it, but was at least the foundation for something. Harry bought the entire trolley's stock of sweets, partly because he could, and partly because the look on Ron's face when presented with a mountain of chocolate frogs was genuinely delightful. They were halfway through the pile when the compartment door opened again, and a girl with bushy brown hair and an air of determined competence stuck her head in. Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one. No, Ron said through a mouthful of cauldron cake. The girl's gaze swept the compartment, cataloging everything with the efficiency of someone who'd already read the manual. Her eyes landed on Harry, and he saw the flicker, recognition, curiosity, the visible effort not to react. You're Harry Potter, she said. I've read about you in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century. Then you know more about me than I do, Harry said. I haven't read any of those. Oh, you should. They're terribly informative. I'm Hermione Granger, by the way, and you are. This last was directed at Ron, who mumbled his name through a spray of crumbs. Pleasure, Hermione said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. You've got something on your nose, did you know? Ron's ears went red. Hermione's gaze came back to Harry, and this time she studied him with the unself-conscious directness of someone who didn't know how to be anything other than honest. The books say you defeated you-know-who as a baby, she said, but they don't agree on how. Do you know? No, Harry said. That must be frustrating. Less than you'd think, she blinked. He could see her processing this, the calm, the confidence, the total absence of the starstruck anxiety she'd expected. Harry Potter in the books was a figure of mystery and tragedy. Harry Potter in person was an 11-year-old boy who sat like a king and spoke like someone who'd already made peace with whatever the world threw at him. I'll find Neville's toad, she said. You should change into your robes. I expect we'll be arriving soon. She left. Ron exhaled. Mental, that one, he said. Sharp, Harry corrected. There's a difference. The train carried them north through green countryside that gradually gave way to wild moorland and dark forest. Harry watched the landscape change and felt, for the first time since the memories had begun, something that might have been anticipation. Not nervousness, the King of Heroes did not get nervous, but the keen-edged awareness that comes before something significant. The castle appeared as the sun was setting. and even Harry, who remembered the ziggurats of Uruk, the cedar forest of the gods, the very edge of the world where Utnapishtim lived in eternal twilight, even Harry felt a moment of genuine wonder. Hogwarts rose from the Scottish landscape like something dreamed into existence. Towers and turrets and buttresses, lit from within by 1,000 windows of golden light, reflected in the black mirror of a vast lake. It was beautiful in the way that power is beautiful, confident, ancient, unapologetic. The magic radiating from it was like standing near a bonfire. Harry could feel it pressing against his skin, testing him, tasting him. He smiled. Not bad, he thought, as the boat carried him across the dark water toward the castle gates. Not bad at all. The great doors opened. The King of Heroes, reborn, walked into Hogwarts. And Hogwarts, old, sentient, and wise in ways that even Dumbledore didn't fully understand, felt him enter. Deep in the castle's foundations, in the bedrock where the ley lines crossed and the original enchantments were woven, something stirred, something recognized, a presence it had not felt in a very, very long time. The torches in the entrance hall burned a little brighter. The stairs settled, just for a moment, into stillness. And high in his tower office, Albus Dumbledore looked up from his desk, his blue eyes suddenly sharp behind his half-moon spectacles, and said very quietly to no one at all, "Interesting." Chapter 2, The Court Assembles. The entrance hall was a cathedral of stone and torchlight, and the first years moved through it like a school of fish, clustered, nervous, awed. Harry moved with them, but not among them. He walked at his own pace, unhurried, his green eyes taking in the architecture with an appreciation that went beyond aesthetics. The castle was old, not Uruk old, not the kind of ancient that predated written language, but old enough that the magic had soaked into the stones like water into clay. Every surface hummed. Every shadow had depth. This was a place where power lived, and it had been living here for so long that it had become part of the foundation. Professor McGonagall met them at the doors to the Great Hall. She was tall, severe, Scottish, and radiated the particular authority of someone who had been in charge of difficult children for decades and had long since stopped finding them charming. Harry liked her immediately. There was no pretense in her. She was exactly what she appeared to be, and in his experience that was rarer than gold. "Welcome to Hogwarts," she said, her voice cutting through the whispered chatter like a blade. "The start of term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you will be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because, while you are here, your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house common room." She explained the 4 houses: Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, and the system of points, and Harry listened with half his attention while the other half mapped the room. The other first years were a mixed bag. Ron was pale and fidgeting beside him. Hermione was whispering frantically to herself, probably reciting every spell she'd ever read. The pale, pointed boy from Madame Malkin's, Draco, Harry remembered, was holding court with 2 large, dull-looking boys who flanked him like bodyguards, and a round-faced boy was clutching a toad with the desperate relief of someone who'd been reunited with their only friend. McGonagall left them to wait, and the whispering intensified. "How exactly do they sort us?" Harry asked Ron. "Some sort of test, I think. Fred said it hurts a lot, but I think he was joking." He was joking, Harry confirmed. He could feel the magic concentrated at the front of the Great Hall, something old, something with a form of consciousness. Not a test of pain, something subtler. The ghosts helped pass the time. They drifted through the wall in a casual violation of physics that made several students shriek, and Harry watched them with interest. Remnants. Echoes of consciousness bound to the material plane by unfinished business or an unwillingness to move on. Gilgamesh had opinions about the dead who refused to stay dead, generally unfavorable ones, but Harry found them more melancholy than offensive. To choose a half-existence over the unknown of what came next required either tremendous courage or tremendous fear, and he suspected it was usually the latter. McGonagall returned and led them into the Great Hall. Harry had seen grand things. He had seen the throne room of Uruk, where cedar beams spanned a ceiling inlaid with lapis lazuli and the walls told stories in gold leaf. He had seen the Garden of the Gods, where every tree bore jewels instead of fruit. He had walked through the underworld itself. The Great Hall of Hogwarts was not those things, but it was, in its own way, magnificent. 4 long tables stretched the length of the room, packed with students in black robes, their faces lit by the warm glow of thousands of candles floating overhead in midair. And above the candles, the ceiling, open to a night sky thick with stars, enchanted to mirror the heavens so perfectly that the boundary between indoors and out simply ceased to exist. "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside," Hermione whispered behind him. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history. Harry looked up at the stars, and for a moment he was standing on the ziggurat in Uruk, looking up at the same stars, different constellations, different age, but the same sky, the same vast indifference of the cosmos, and the distance between who he had been and who he was now felt like nothing at all. McGonagall placed a stool at the front of the hall and set upon it a hat. Ancient, patched, frayed at the brim, it looked like something you'd find at the bottom of a donation bin. The hall went quiet. A rip near the brim opened like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. Harry listened to the song, a jaunty, rhyming overview of the four houses and their virtues, and analyzed it the way he analyzed everything. Gryffindor valued courage, Ravenclaw valued intellect, Hufflepuff valued loyalty and hard work, Slytherin valued ambition and cunning. Simple categories for complex children, useful as a starting framework, dangerous as an identity. The song ended, the hall applauded, McGonagall unrolled a scroll. When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted. Abbot Hannah, a pink-faced girl, stumbled forward, sat on the stool, and the hat fell over her eyes. A moment's pause. Hufflepuff, the table on the right, erupted. The girl hurried over, beaming. The sorting continued. Harry watched each one, reading the students as they walked up, their posture, their breathing, the micro-expressions that betrayed their hopes and fears. Most of them were open books. A few were more interesting. Granger, Hermione. Hermione practically ran to the stool. The hat took its time with her, nearly 4 minutes, before shouting Gryffindor. She came down grinning, and Harry noted that the hat had considered her carefully. She wasn't a simple sort. Good. Longbottom Neville, the round-faced boy with the toad. He tripped on the way up, which drew scattered laughter, and sat on the stool with the expression of someone awaiting execution. The hat considered him for a long time, too, and Harry watched closely. There was something about this boy. Not power exactly, not in the way wizards measured it, but something, a quality. Toad Boy sat there, trembling and miserable, and Harry recognized what he was looking at because he'd seen it 1,000 times on 1,000 battlefields. Courage that didn't know it was courage. Bravery so deep it had buried itself beneath fear, waiting for the moment it would be needed. Gryffindor, the hat announced, and Neville almost fell off the stool in surprise. Malfoy Draco, the pointed boy, strutted forward with the confidence of someone who'd been told since birth that the world was his oyster. The hat barely touched his head. Slytherin, Draco sauntered to the Slytherin table looking smug. Harry filed him away. Not a threat, not yet. But the boy had connections, and connections mattered. More names, more sortings. The hall was getting restless, the unsorted group thinning, and then Potter, Harry. The whispers erupted like a geyser. Potter, did she say? The Harry Potter. Harry walked to the stool without hurrying. The entire hall was staring, 4 tables of students craning their necks, the staff table leaning forward, 500 pairs of eyes fixed on the skinny boy with the lightning scar. He sat on the stool, and McGonagall lowered the hat onto his head. The brim fell past his eyes, and the hall vanished. Darkness, and then, well, said a small voice in his ear. This is unexpected. Harry said nothing. He waited. Oh, you don't need to speak aloud, the hat said. I can see everything in here. I can see your thoughts, your memories, your oh. The hat went silent. Harry felt it probing deeper, pushing past the surface layers of his mind, his childhood, the Dursleys, Diagon Alley, and hitting the bedrock beneath. The golden doors, the treasury, the vast, ancient architecture of a soul that had lived before. You're not just a boy, the hat whispered, and for the first time in what was probably centuries, it sounded shaken. You're not just a wizard, you're, what are you? I am the king of heroes, Harry thought, calmly and without arrogance, the way you might state that water is wet. I am Gilgamesh, reborn. I am Harry Potter. I am both. Gilgamesh, the hat breathed, the first hero, the king who sought immortality and found wisdom. I have sat on 1,000 heads and read 1,000 souls, and I have never, where do I belong? Belong, the hat almost laughed. You could go anywhere. Ravenclaw would kill for a mind like yours, and I don't mean Potter's mind, I mean the other one. The strategic intelligence, the depth of knowledge, you'd make Rowena herself look incurious. Slytherin, oh, Salazar would have loved you. The ambition, the cunning, the absolute certainty that you are destined for greatness. You are great, you are great. Slytherin could give you the tools to. I've been a king, Harry thought. I don't need tools for ambition. I've already achieved everything ambition can offer. What I need, what I didn't have last time, not until it was too late, is the courage to care about people more than power. The hat was quiet for a moment. You know, it said softly, in 1,000 years, no one has ever understood the houses as clearly as you just did. Gryffindor isn't about being fearless. It's about choosing to act when you're afraid. And you're not afraid of anything in this castle. But you're afraid of something, aren't you? You're afraid of living another life without, don't say his name. I don't need to, I can feel the wound, 5,000 years and it's still bleeding. Harry's jaw tightened. Inside the darkness of the hat, where no one could see, the King of Heroes allowed himself a single moment of vulnerability. The ache of Enkidu's absence, the hollow in his chest that nothing had ever filled, not conquest, not glory, not the treasures of all the world. Gryffindor, Harry thought. Put me in Gryffindor, not because I'm brave, because I need to learn to be something other than a king. Oh, I think you're already more than a king, Mr. Potter. Very well. Better be Gryffindor. The last word was shouted to the hall, and the hat was lifted from his head, and the Gryffindor table exploded. The Weasley twins were chanting, "We got Potter, we got Potter," and Hermione was clapping frantically, and Ron was grinning with relief, and the noise was enormous, a wall of sound and approval and welcome. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down next to Hermione. He inclined his head to acknowledge the welcome, but didn't perform gratitude or false humility. He simply sat, composed, present, and when the cheering died down and the sorting resumed, he turned his attention to the staff table. There, in the center, the old man with the long silver beard and the half-moon spectacles, wearing robes of deep purple with little silver moons and stars. Albus Dumbledore. He was watching Harry with an expression of benign interest that didn't quite reach his eyes, which were sharp and calculating and deeply, deeply curious. Harry met his gaze, held it, didn't look away. In Uruk, when a courtier had locked eyes with the king uninvited, it had been considered either a challenge or a sign of extraordinary courage. Dumbledore was doing neither. He was taking Harry's measure, the way a jeweler examined a stone, looking for flaws and brilliance in equal portion. Harry let him look. He had nothing to hide. He simply let the old man see what everyone else had missed, the depth, the weight, the absolute unshakable certainty that the boy looking back at him was not and had never been a child who could be managed. Dumbledore's eyes flickered. The benign smile remained, but something behind it shifted. A recalculation, an adjustment of expectations. Good, let him adjust. The sorting ended. Dumbledore stood and said a few words: nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak, which were either a code, a joke, or a test of the audience's willingness to accept absurdity from authority. Harry suspected all three, and then the feast appeared. The table filled with food: roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops, lamb, sausages, steak, potatoes in every conceivable form, Yorkshire pudding, vegetables, gravy, and the hall descended into the happy chaos of hundreds of hungry children eating. Harry ate with the precise, unhurried manners of someone who had been served by the finest kitchens in the ancient world. Ron, next to him, was shoveling food with the intensity of a boy who had 5 older brothers and had learned that hesitation meant starvation. Hermione was eating more delicately, sneaking glances at Harry between bites. "The hat took ages with you," she said. "What was it saying?" "It was considering its options," Harry said. "But it chose Gryffindor." "I chose Gryffindor," the hat agreed. She blinked. "You can choose. You can always choose, Hermione. That's rather the point of free will." She looked at him with that expression again, the one that said she was used to being the smartest person in the room and was encountering for the first time the possibility that she might not be. It wasn't threatened, though. It was interested. Harry could work with interested. "I'm Harry, by the way," he said. "We didn't properly meet on the train. Hermione Granger. My parents are dentists. I'm Muggle-born. I didn't know anything about magic until I got my letter, and I've read everything I could find since. Really the boy who lived, apparently, though I've never been fond of the title. What would you prefer?" The question caught him off guard, not because it was difficult, but because no one had ever asked. Everyone in this world had already decided who Harry Potter was: a symbol, a savior, a story. No one had thought to ask him what he wanted to be called. "Harry," he said. "Just Harry." She smiled. It was a good smile, genuine, a little awkward, entirely without guile. "Just Harry, then." Past the potatoes, the Gryffindor common room was a circular tower room, warm and cluttered, done in shades of scarlet and gold. Armchairs by the fire, bookshelves along the walls, staircases leading up to the dormitories. The portrait of a fat lady in a pink silk dress guarded the entrance and demanded a password, which Percy Weasley, Ron's older brother, a prefect with more self-importance than a minor deity, provided with great ceremony. Harry surveyed the room and chose an armchair near the fire that had a clear sightline to both the entrance and the stairs. Old habits. A king always knew where the exits were. Ron collapsed into the chair next to him. "That feast, I could die happy." "You'd die with indigestion," Harry said. "You ate 4 plates, 3.5. The last one was mostly pudding." "Pudding doesn't count. In what universe does pudding not count? The one where I'm right and you're wrong." Ron grinned, and despite himself, Harry felt the corner of his mouth twitch. The boy was growing on him, not because he was remarkable by most metrics. Ron Weasley was thoroughly ordinary, but because he was real. No pretense, no agenda, no performance. Just a gangly kid with a big appetite and a bigger heart who said whatever came into his head and let the consequences sort themselves out. There was a courage in that. A small, quiet, entirely unself-aware courage that Harry found refreshing after a lifetime, 2 lifetimes, of people who weighed every word for advantage. The first-year boys' dormitory was at the top of the tower. 5 four-poster beds with deep red curtains, and Harry's trunk was already at the foot of one, Hedwig's empty cage on the nightstand. His roommates were Ron, Neville, and 2 other boys, Seamus Finnegan, who was Irish and enthusiastic, and Dean Thomas, who was tall and quiet and had a West Ham poster he was already blue-tacking to the wall. Harry changed, got into bed, and drew the curtains. In the darkness behind the heavy velvet, he lay on his back and closed his eyes. The castle breathed around him. He could feel it, the pulse of ancient magic in the walls, slow and steady as a heartbeat. The enchantments layered over centuries, each generation adding to the last, building a structure of magical complexity that was genuinely impressive. Hogwarts was alive in its way, not sentient, not exactly, but aware, and it was aware of him. He reached inward, past the surface, down to the golden doors. They were warmer here, closer to the surface. The ambient magic of Hogwarts was feeding something, not opening the gate, nothing so dramatic, but nourishing it, like sunlight on a seed. The Gate of Babylon responded to magical environments, and Hogwarts was the most magical environment Harry had ever been in. He could feel the treasures more clearly tonight. Not just as a distant hum, but as individual presences, each one distinct, each one calling to him with the patient certainty of things that knew they would eventually be needed. Not yet, Harry told them, but soon. He slept, and in his dreams he walked the streets of Uruk, and the streets became the corridors of Hogwarts, and both were his, and both were home. Morning came fast and golden, light flooding through the tower windows, and Harry was awake before the others, dressed and sitting on his bed when the first alarm went off. Ron required 3 separate attempts to wake. Neville managed it on the 3rd try by accidentally dropping a shoe on his head, and they went down to breakfast as a group, navigating the moving staircases with varying degrees of success. Harry walked the corridors with the confident stride of someone who'd already memorized the layout, which he had. He'd studied the movements of the staircases from the common room the night before, timing the rotations, mapping the patterns. There were patterns. Chaotic ones, but patterns nonetheless. Gilgamesh's mind found order in chaos the way a river found the sea, inevitably. Their first class was Transfiguration with McGonagall. The classroom was on the 2nd floor, and when they arrived, the professor was nowhere to be seen. A tabby cat sat on the desk, watching them with sharp eyes. Most students took seats and whispered nervously. Harry looked at the cat, noted the spectacle-like markings around its eyes, and took a seat in the 2nd row without comment. Ron and Seamus burst in 2 minutes late, panting. "Thank God McGonagall isn't here yet," Ron gasped, sliding into the seat next to Harry. Can you imagine the look on her face if the cat leaped from the desk and transformed midair into Professor McGonagall? Ron's mouth dropped open. Seamus made a sound like a deflating balloon. "Perhaps I should transfigure one of you into a pocket watch," McGonagall said crisply. "That way at least one of you might be on time." "That was brilliant," Ron whispered. "Thank you for that assessment, Mr. Weasley. Take your seat." The lesson began. Transfiguration, McGonagall explained, was some of the most complex and dangerous magic they would learn at Hogwarts. It required precision, concentration, and a thorough understanding of the theoretical principles involved. She gave them a matchstick and told them to turn it into a needle. Harry picked up his matchstick, looked at it, and considered the problem. Transfiguration, as described in the textbook, operated on the principle of imposing your will upon matter, convincing reality that what was wood was now metal, what was rough was now smooth. It was essentially a localized rewriting of physical law. Gilgamesh had done something similar once, not with wands and incantations, but with the raw authority of divine will. The principle was the same. The universe was not fixed, it was negotiable. And Harry had been negotiating with the universe since before these wizards' ancestors had learned to make fire. He pointed his wand at the matchstick, murmured the incantation, because he was here to learn their methods, not to show off, and pushed. The matchstick didn't just become a needle, it became a perfect needle. Silver, gleaming, sharp enough to draw blood from a shadow. It lay on his desk like a tiny sword, and the magic that had made it was so clean, so effortless, that there was no residual shimmer, no gradual transformation. One moment matchstick, the next needle. McGonagall, who had been circling the room, stopped beside his desk. She stared at the needle. She picked it up and examined it, turning it in her fingers, and Harry watched something happen to her face that he suspected didn't happen very often. She was surprised, genuinely, deeply surprised. "Mr. Potter," she said slowly, This is exceptional work. Thank you, Professor. You've done this before." She looked at him. Her eyes were sharp and searching, and he met her gaze the same way he'd met Dumbledore's, openly, without challenge, without submission. Just the steady, level regard of someone who was exactly what he appeared to be. 10 points to Gryffindor, she said, and there was a note in her voice that hadn't been there before. Caution, maybe, or respect. Or the beginning of the understanding that Harry Potter was not going to be a normal student. Hermione, 3 desks over, had managed to make her matchstick silver but hadn't changed its shape. She was staring at Harry's perfect needle with an expression that combined admiration and competitive fury in roughly equal measure. The first week established patterns. Harry excelled at everything. Not with flash or showmanship. He didn't grandstand, didn't volunteer answers he wasn't asked for, didn't wave his hand in the air like Hermione, desperate to prove herself. He simply did the work, and the work was flawless. In charms, tiny Professor Flitwick had them practicing the basic wand movements, and Harry's were so precise that Flitwick paused mid-lecture to watch him, then continued with a slightly dazed expression. In herbology, Professor Sprout found Harry handling the plants with a familiarity that went beyond textbook knowledge. Gilgamesh had known herbs and growing things, had walked through the garden where jeweled fruits grew on crystal branches, and the deep instinct for living things translated across lifetimes. In history of magic, taught by a ghost named Professor Binns, who had apparently died of boredom and now inflicted the same fate on his students, Harry sat quietly and absorbed information that was, to him, genuinely fascinating. These wizards had a history, a long history, and knowing it would give him advantages. The only class that gave him pause was potion. The dungeon classroom was cold and dim, and Professor Snape entered like a thunderstorm, black robes billowing, black hair curtaining a sallow face, black eyes that swept the room and landed on Harry with the precision of a targeting system. "Ah, yes," Snape said softly. "Harry Potter, our new celebrity." The Slytherins snickered, the Gryffindors tensed. Harry looked at Snape and read him the way he read everyone, and what he saw was complex. There was hatred there, yes, but it was old hatred, layered and fermented, and it wasn't really aimed at Harry. It was aimed at someone Harry reminded him of, the structure of the face, the set of the jaw. James Potter's ghost, wearing Lily Potter's eyes, sitting in a dead woman's seat. Snape was in pain. Harry could see it as clearly as the scars on a soldier's face. This man was not cruel by nature, he was cruel by damage, and there was a difference, even if the receiving end felt the same. "You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making," Snape said, beginning a speech that had the polished cadence of something rehearsed over many years. He spoke about bottling fame, brewing glory, putting a stopper in death, and Harry listened, because this was a man who genuinely loved his subject and was using it as a wall between himself and the world. The speech ended and Snape turned to Harry with the suddenness of a viper striking. "Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormhood?" Harry didn't blink. The draft of living death, a sleeping potion so powerful it can mimic death itself. Something flickered in Snape's eyes. Surprise, maybe. The answer had been too fast, too confident, too correct. "Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" "The stomach of a goat." "It's a stone that can cure most poisons. I'd also suggest keeping one in your pocket at all times if you regularly handle toxic ingredients, which you presumably do." A muscle twitched in Snape's jaw. The classroom was very quiet. Hermione had her hand raised and was practically vibrating, but no one was looking at her. Everyone was watching the silent war between the potion's master and the first year who was answering his questions without a shred of deference. "What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "Nothing. They're the same plant, also called aconite." Snape stared at him. The hatred was still there, but underneath it, something else was surfacing, the same thing Harry had seen in McGonagall's face. The uncomfortable recognition that the boy in front of him was not what he'd expected. "It seems fame isn't everything," Snape said finally, and the words should have been a sneer but came out almost flat. Confused, he turned away. "Well, why aren't you all writing this down?" The lesson continued. Potions itself was interesting, the precision, the chemistry, the delicate interplay of magical ingredients, and Harry found himself enjoying it despite Snape's relentless antagonism. The man prowled the dungeon criticizing everyone's work with surgical viciousness, but when he paused behind Harry's cauldron and found nothing to criticize, the silence was louder than any insult. Ron, whose potion had curdled into something resembling toxic porridge, leaned over. "He hates you." "He hates my father," Harry corrected quietly. "I'm just the nearest available substitute." "Same thing, isn't it? Not even close." After the lesson, as the students filed out, Snape's voice followed Harry to the door. Potter. Harry stopped, turned. Snape was standing by his desk, arms folded, and his expression was a complicated map of emotions that he was clearly unused to displaying. The classroom was empty except for the two of them. "Your mother," Snape said, and then stopped. His jaw worked, his eyes, dark, deep, wounded, held Harry's, and in that moment, Harry saw something that only someone with 5,000 years of experience reading human souls could have caught. A grief as deep as his own, a loss that had never healed. Snape had loved Lily Potter. That was what Harry was looking at. Not hatred, not resentment, but a love so old and so buried under years of bitterness that it had fossilized into something almost unrecognizable. And every time Snape looked at Harry's green eyes, he saw her, and the pain was fresh. "I know what that feels like," Harry thought. "I carry my own ghost." "Your mother was exceptional at potions," Snape said stiffly. "I expect you to maintain her standard." "I intend to exceed it," Harry said without arrogance and walked out. Behind him, Snape stood very still for a long time. Flying lessons came on Thursday, and they changed everything. The lesson was shared with Slytherin, which meant Draco Malfoy, which meant theater. Madame Hooch, a brisk woman with yellow hawk eyes, lined them up on the Quidditch pitch with broomsticks laid out on the grass and began the basics. Hover, mount, grip, line. Neville's broomstick had other ideas. It happened fast. The broom bucked, Neville yelped, and suddenly the round-faced boy was rising, 10 feet, 20, 30, his hands white-knuckled on the handle, his face a mask of terror. He lost his grip at 40 feet and fell. The crack of his wrist hitting the ground was audible across the pitch. Madame Hooch was there in seconds, helping Neville up, his face gray with pain, his left wrist hanging at a wrong angle. She marched him toward the hospital wing with strict instructions that no one was to move. The moment she was out of sight, Malfoy pounced. "Did you see his face, the great lump?" He was laughing, picking something up off the grass, a glass ball filled with white smoke. Neville's remembrall. Maybe if the fat idiot had given this a squeeze, he'd have remembered to fall on his. "Give that back, Malfoy." Harry's voice cut through the laughter like a sword through silk. He hadn't raised it, hadn't stepped forward. He was simply standing where he'd been, hands at his sides, looking at Draco with an expression that made the Slytherin's grin falter. "Make me Potter. I won't ask twice." Draco's eyes narrowed. The crowd had gone quiet. Crabbe and Goyle, Draco's perpetual shadows, shifted their weight. The Gryffindors and Slytherins had unconsciously arranged themselves along factional lines, and the air had the charged, brittle quality of a confrontation waiting to happen. Draco, whose instinct for drama exceeded his instinct for self-preservation, mounted his broomstick and kicked off. He rose into the air, hovering at 20 feet, the remembrall held aloft. "Come and get it, Potter." "Or are you all talk?" Harry looked at the broomstick at his feet. He'd never flown before. Neither Harry nor Gilgamesh had ever ridden a broomstick. But Gilgamesh had ridden the Bull of Heaven, had sailed vessels across the waters of death, had traveled by chariot and by ship and by the sheer force of his will. The principle was universal. You told the thing where to go, and it went. He mounted the broom. The moment his hands touched the handle, something clicked. The broom responded to him with an eagerness that went beyond the mechanical. It wanted to fly with him, the way Ollivander's wands had wanted to respond to his presence. His magic was dense, ancient, and the broom drank it in. Harry kicked off and rose. The ground dropped away. Wind rushed past him, cold and clean, and Harry Potter, the boy who had spent 10 years locked in a cupboard, felt something he hadn't felt in either of his lives: freedom. The sky opened above him, infinite and blue, and the broom moved with his thoughts, banking and climbing and diving with a responsiveness that was almost alive. He was built for this. His reflexes, sharpened by Gilgamesh's combat instincts and honed by 11 years of dodging Dudley's fists, translated perfectly to aerial movement. Every shift of weight, every flex of his fingers, the broom responded as if it were an extension of his body. He leveled off at Malfoy's height. Draco was trying to maintain his sneer, but Harry could see the uncertainty underneath it. The boy had expected hesitation, not this easy, terrifying competence. "Last chance," Harry said. "Give it back." "Catch it," Draco said, and hurled the remembrall as hard as he could toward the castle. The glass ball arced through the air, glinting in the sunlight, rising and then falling in a long, graceful parabola. Harry watched it for half a second, reading the trajectory, calculating the speed, mapping the intercept, and then he moved. The broom shot forward like a bolt of golden lightning. He didn't chase the ball, he anticipated it. Leaning flat against the handle, he dove at an angle that took him below the ball's arc, building speed, and then pulled up in a curve so tight and so fast that the air screamed around him. The students on the ground were screaming too, in terror or exhilaration. He couldn't tell and didn't care. The remembrall was falling now, dropping past the castle wall, and Harry reached out and plucked it from the air like picking a fruit from a branch. Casual, effortless, one-handed. He landed on the pitch in a controlled descent that kicked up a circle of grass, dismounted the broom with the fluid ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, and walked back to the group. Silence. Complete total silence, then pandemonium. The Gryffindors erupted. Seamus was screaming something incoherent. Dean was jumping up and down. Ron looked like he'd just witnessed the second coming. Even the Slytherins were staring, and Draco Malfoy, still hovering 20 feet up, had the expression of someone who just realized the game he was playing was several orders of magnitude above his level. Harry held up the Remembrall. "I'll return this to Neville," he said simply. "Harry Potter." McGonagall's voice could have stripped paint off a wall. She was striding across the pitch with the purpose and velocity of an incoming missile, and every student within earshot went rigid. "Never in all my years, first time on a broomstick. Professor, I can explain. Come with me, Potter, now." Ron shot Harry a look of pure horror. Harry followed McGonagall without protest, matching her brisk pace through the corridors, up staircases, past startled students. She didn't speak until they'd reached a specific classroom door, which she knocked on with the authority of someone who expected immediate obedience. "Excuse me, Professor Flitwick, could I borrow Wood for a moment?" Oliver Wood turned out to be a burly fifth year with the build of a rugby player and the expression of someone who'd just been told Christmas was coming early. "I've found you a seeker," McGonagall told him. Wood stared at Harry. Harry stared back, calm, waiting. "First years never, are you sure, Professor?" Wood's voice was climbing with excitement. "He'd need a decent broom. First years aren't normally allowed. I'll speak to Professor Dumbledore about the broom, I'm more than sure." McGonagall looked at Harry, and her expression, which had been stern enough to bend steel, softened by a fraction. "Your father would have been proud. He was an excellent Quidditch player himself." "Thank you, Professor," Harry said, and meant it. That evening, the Gryffindor common room treated Harry like a returning conqueror. The Weasley twins, Fred and George, a matched set of chaos in human form, clapped him on the back and declared him the youngest seeker in a century. Ron was telling everyone who'd listen about the dive, with embellishments that grew more dramatic with each retelling. Even Percy, the prefect, managed a stiff nod of approval. Harry sat by the fire and let the warmth of their approval wash over him without drowning in it. He'd been celebrated before. He'd been worshipped, feared, adored by millions. The cheers of the Gryffindor common room were nothing compared to the roar of Uruk's arena, but they were warmer, more personal. These people didn't worship him because he was a demigod. They were happy because a boy had done something remarkable on a broomstick. The purity of it was almost painful. Hermione appeared beside his chair with a book in her arms and a complicated expression on her face. "That was incredibly reckless," she said. "You could have broken your neck." "I couldn't have, actually. You'd never been on a broom before, first time for everything." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "How did you do that?" Harry looked at her. She wasn't asking about the flying, or rather, she was, but the question underneath the question was bigger. How are you like this? How are you so calm, so sure, so completely unbothered by things that should terrify you? "Some people are born with certain abilities," Harry said carefully. "The trick is not being afraid of them." "That's not an answer. It's the best one I have right now." She studied him for a long moment, her brown eyes sharp and searching. Then she nodded, as if filing away an incomplete data set for future analysis, and said, "Congratulations on making the team, Harry." "Thank you, Hermione." She sat down in the chair opposite him and opened her book, and they sat together by the fire in companionable silence while the common room celebrated around them. It was, Harry reflected, a small thing. Two people reading by a fire. But small things had a way of becoming foundations, and he was in the business of building things that lasted. The days settled into a rhythm: classes, meals, homework, Quidditch practice. Harry moved through them all with the same steady competence, drawing attention not by seeking it, but by being impossible to ignore. In every class, every lesson, his work was exceptional. Not showy, he never performed for the audience, but consistently, quietly, undeniably brilliant. The other students noticed. Of course they did. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, who also happened to be the best at every subject, the youngest seeker in a century, and the possessor of a calm self-assurance that made most adults look fidgety. The Gryffindors adopted him as their champion. The Ravenclaws watched him with academic interest. The Hufflepuffs were warily impressed. The Slytherins, most of them, settled on resentment as the most comfortable response. And Draco Malfoy settled on obsession. The Remembrall incident had wounded Draco in a way that a physical injury wouldn't have. Harry had taken something from him, not the glass ball, but the narrative. Draco Malfoy was supposed to be the Prince of Slytherin, the heir of an ancient and wealthy family, the natural aristocrat. Harry Potter had dismantled that narrative in 30 seconds on a broomstick, not by competing with Draco, but by making competition irrelevant. You didn't compete with the sun. You just stood in its light or its shadow. Draco tried. He tried insults. Think you're special, Potter. You're just famous because your parents died. Intimidation, sending Crabbe and Goyle to block Harry in corridors, and social maneuvering, loudly telling anyone who'd listen that Harry was a half-blood who'd been raised by muggles and didn't deserve his fame. Harry responded to all of it with the same infuriating composure. He didn't retaliate, didn't escalate, didn't even acknowledge most of it. When Draco called him a half-blood in the Great Hall, Harry had looked at him and said, "Your point being," in a tone so devoid of offense that Draco had been left sputtering, unable to complete a confrontation that required 2 participants. It was driving Malfoy mad. Why don't you ever fight back? Ron demanded one evening after Draco had staged a particularly theatrical confrontation outside the potions classroom. "He's a git. He deserves a good hex." "He deserves to be ignored," Harry said. "That's what frightens him." Being ignored frightens him. Malfoy's entire identity is built on the reactions of others. His father's approval, his peers' respect, his enemies' anger. Take away the reaction and there's nothing left. He'll either grow past it or he won't, but either way, it's not my problem to solve. Ron stared at him. "You know, sometimes you say things that sound like they should come from a very old, very tired man." "Maybe they do," Harry said, and left it at that. The mystery of the third-floor corridor announced itself at the start of term feast, buried in Dumbledore's warnings. The corridor on the right-hand side of the third floor was out of bounds to everyone who did not wish to die a very painful death. Most students had taken this at face value. Harry had taken it as a starting point. Something was being hidden in Hogwarts. Something important enough to guard with lethal force, but not important enough to store somewhere actually secure, like Gringotts, for instance. The grubby little package Hagrid had retrieved from Vault 713. The 3-headed dog that Neville had accidentally discovered behind the locked door. Neville, it turned out, had a gift for being in the wrong place at the right time. The little article in the Daily Prophet about a break-in at Gringotts, Vault 713, on the very day Harry had visited. The pieces assembled themselves in Harry's mind with the effortless precision of a master strategist receiving intelligence reports. Someone had tried to steal whatever was in Vault 713. It had been moved to Hogwarts, probably on Dumbledore's orders, probably by Hagrid. Now guarded behind the third-floor corridor, protected by what was apparently a 3-headed dog and likely other defenses as well. "What do you know about Nicholas Flamel?" Harry asked Hermione one evening in the library where she had established a permanent outpost among the reference shelves. She looked up from her Transfiguration essay. "Flamel? Why, his name was on a chocolate frog card. Dumbledore is noted for his work with Nicholas Flamel. I'm curious what they worked on together." Hermione's eyes lit up. She loved a research question the way some people loved birthday presents. "I'll look into it." Harry didn't tell her about the third-floor corridor or the vault break-in. Not yet. He wanted more information before he brought others into it, and he wanted to be sure he could trust them, not with the information, but with the judgment to handle it wisely. Trust was not something the King of Heroes gave freely. It was earned slowly through demonstrated character. Hermione was earning it through honesty and reliability. Ron was earning it through loyalty and an increasingly uncomfortable willingness to follow Harry into whatever came next. Neville, quiet, clumsy, perpetually nervous Neville, was earning it simply by being brave enough to get out of bed every morning in a world that seemed determined to knock him down. These were not Enkidu. No one would ever be Enkidu, but they were. Harry was beginning to realize something he hadn't had in either life: friends who liked him for himself, not for his crown or his fame or the power that radiated from him like heat from a furnace. The realization was uncomfortable. Vulnerability always was. October brought the Quidditch season, and with it, Harry's first match. Oliver Wood had been training him 3 times a week for a month, and Harry had absorbed everything the captain could teach him with the attentiveness of a military strategist learning a new form of warfare. The rules, the positions, the tactics. The role of the seeker: find the snitch, catch the snitch, end the game. Simple in concept, devastatingly complex in execution. The morning of the match, Gryffindor versus Slytherin, Harry ate breakfast with his usual composure while the rest of the team vibrated with nervous energy around him. Wood hadn't touched his food. The Weasley twins were cracking jokes with a manic intensity that betrayed their tension. Katie, Angelina, and Alicia were reviewing plays in murmured conversation. "Eat something, Harry," Hermione urged from across the table. "You need your strength." "I'm fine, you're always fine, it's very annoying," Harry smiled. The first genuine, unguarded smile Hermione had ever seen from him, and she blinked, startled by how much it changed his face. He looked for a moment like a normal 11-year-old boy about to play his first game of sport. "Hermione," he said, "I promise you of all the things that might go wrong today, my performance is not one of them." The crowd was enormous. The stands were packed, a sea of scarlet and green, and the roar when the teams walked onto the pitch was loud enough to rattle bones. Harry, the youngest player in a century, mounted his broom. A Nimbus 2000 that McGonagall had procured through channels Harry suspected were deliberately opaque, and kicked off. The game erupted. The Slytherin team was bigger, older, and meaner. They played with the kind of casual brutality that suggested either poor sportsmanship or an excellent coach, possibly both. The Gryffindor chasers fought for every point. The beaters, Fred and George, did their best to protect the team, and Wood guarded the hoops with stubborn determination. Harry climbed above the chaos, scanning for the snitch. The first 15 minutes were search and observation. He circled the pitch in wide arcs, his eyes processing the field with superhuman precision. Not just looking for the snitch, reading the game. The patterns of play, the Slytherin team's tendencies, the way their seeker, a brute named Higgs, was shadowing him rather than searching independently. Then his broom jerked. It was subtle at first, a stutter, a momentary loss of control. Harry's hands tightened on the handle. The broom jerked again, harder, and this time it bucked like a living thing trying to throw its rider. Harry felt it immediately. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was magic. Someone was jinxing his broom. The King of Heroes did not panic. Panic was for people who didn't have options. Harry's eyes swept the crowd. His vision, sharpened by Gilgamesh's instincts, cut through the distance and the movement and found what he was looking for. In the staff section, two professors with their eyes locked on him. One was Snape, whose lips were moving in what was clearly a countercurse, his dark eyes fixed and intent. The other was the man in the turban, Professor Quirrell, Defense Against the Dark Arts. Quirrell's lips were moving too. Harry felt it then. Not just the jinx on the broom, that was surface level, a nuisance, but something underneath it. Something writing the magical connection between Quirrell and the broom like a parasite on a signal. Something cold and rotten and deeply, fundamentally wrong. The kind of wrongness that made Gilgamesh's soul recoil because the King of Heroes had faced monsters and gods and demons, and he knew the scent of something that had defied death through unnatural means. The broom bucked violently. Harry's grip slipped. For one lurching second, he was hanging by one hand, the pitch spinning below him, the crowd screaming, and then Harry Potter made a decision. He didn't fight the jinx. He didn't wait for someone else to break it. He pulled himself back onto the broom with the core strength of a body that had been quietly exceeding its apparent limits for years, and he flooded the broom with his magic. Not wizard magic, not the wand-channeled, incantation-shaped variety. The other kind, the deep kind. The golden, ancient, absolute authority of the King of Heroes, pouring through the connection between rider and broomstick like sunlight through a window. The jinx shattered. It didn't fade or weaken or gradually lose its grip. It broke like glass hitting stone, and the broom snapped back to obedience so abruptly that the crowd gasped. Harry hung in the air for a moment, perfectly still. Then he looked down. The snitch was there, 12 feet below him, hovering near the grass, its golden wings a blur. He dove. The Nimbus 2000 went from stationary to terminal velocity in the space of a heartbeat. Harry plummeted toward the ground, the wind a howling wall, the grass rushing up to meet him. And at the last possible second, the absolute last second, so close that his toes brushed the turf, he pulled up and closed his fingers around the snitch. The stadium detonated. Harry landed lightly, held up the struggling golden ball, and the Gryffindor stands became a waterfall of scarlet and gold. Lee Jordan, the commentator, was screaming something about the greatest debut in Hogwarts history. McGonagall in the staff box had both hands pressed to her mouth. Even Dumbledore was applauding, those blue eyes twinkling with something that might have been delight and might have been calculation. Harry's teammates mobbed him. Wood was crying. The twins were attempting to lift him on their shoulders, which he politely declined. Ron was in the stands, his face the color of a tomato from screaming. But Harry, even as he accepted the celebration, was looking toward the staff section. Quirrell had left. Snape was still there, watching Harry with an expression that was impossible to read from this distance, but was probably complex. Someone in this castle had tried to kill him. Or at the very least, someone had tried to hurt him. And the malevolence he'd felt coming through that jinx, the cold, rotten wrongness that wasn't Quirrell's. Quirrell was a vessel, a puppet, a mask. Whatever was behind that mask was old and dark and patient, and it was in this school. Harry knew the taste of evil. He'd been fighting it for 5,000 years. You made a mistake, he thought, looking at the empty seat where Quirrell had been. You showed yourself, and now I know you're here. The celebration carried on around him. Harry smiled and shook hands and accepted congratulations. But inside, behind the green eyes and the lightning scar, the King of Heroes was sharpening his sword. The game had changed, and the king always won. Chapter 3, Treasures and Trolls. The library at Hogwarts was a labyrinth of knowledge stacked floor to ceiling, and Hermione Granger moved through it like a general through a war room. She had commandeered a table in the back corner, far from the entrance, close to the restricted section, with good sightline to the windows for natural light, and had fortified it with stacks of books, rolls of parchment, and a color-coded system of bookmarks that Ron found simultaneously impressive and terrifying. Harry sat across from her, reading. Not homework, he'd finished his assignments for the week by Tuesday, a fact that annoyed Hermione to a degree she tried very hard to hide, but a heavy, leather-bound volume titled Ancient Alchemical Partnerships of the Modern Age. Hermione had found it 3 days ago after Harry's question about Nicholas Flamel sent her on a research campaign with the intensity of a bloodhound on a scent trail. Here, she said, sliding a piece of parchment across the table. Her handwriting was small and precise. Nicholas Flamel, born 1326, French alchemist, the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone. Harry read her notes. The Philosopher's Stone, a legendary alchemical creation that could transform any metal into pure gold and produce the elixir of life, which would make the drinker immortal. Flamel and his wife Perenelle had been using it for centuries. The stone was the only one known to exist. Harry set down the parchment and stared at the far wall. The Philosopher's Stone, an artifact that granted immortality. Hidden in a school full of children, behind a three-headed dog and whatever other protections Dumbledore had arranged. Inside him, something stirred that was not quite anger and not quite contempt but lived in the territory between the two. The King of Heroes had once sought immortality himself, had crossed the waters of death, had found Utnapishtim at the edge of the world, had held the plant of eternal youth in his hands and lost it to a serpent. Gilgamesh knew the price of that quest better than anyone who had ever lived. And the idea that someone had actually achieved it, had bottled immortality like a potion ingredient, and that this artifact was now sitting in a school, drawing whatever darkness had tried to steal it from Gringotts directly to a building full of children. Harry, Hermione was watching him. You've gone very still. I'm thinking. About what? He looked at her. Hermione Granger, 11 years old, bushy-haired and bright-eyed, and so hungry for knowledge that she practically vibrated with it. She deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as she could use. The package Hagrid took from Gringotts Vault 713 on the day we visited, Harry said. The break-in at the same vault reported in the Daily Prophet. The third-floor corridor that's off-limits on pain of death. The three-headed dog Neville stumbled across. And now Nicholas Flamel, Dumbledore's partner, maker of the only Philosopher's Stone in existence. Hermione's eyes widened as the pieces clicked into place. He could almost hear the mechanism of her mind engaging, the connections firing. The stone is here, she breathed. In Hogwarts, that's what's being guarded. Yes, but that's mad. Why would Dumbledore keep something like that in a school? If someone's already tried to steal it, that's the question, isn't it? And the third-floor corridor, that's where the dog is. So the stone is somewhere beneath it, behind whatever protections, multiple protections, almost certainly. Dumbledore wouldn't rely on a single guard. Each teacher probably contributed something, layers of defense. But who's trying to steal it? Harry said nothing for a moment. He thought about the Quidditch match. The jinx on his broom, the feeling of cold, rotting wrongness that had come through the magical connection from Quirrell's direction. Someone in this castle, Harry said quietly. Someone who wants the elixir of life badly enough to risk Dumbledore's protections. Hermione bit her lip. You think it's a teacher. I think it's something wearing a teacher. She stared at him. What does that mean? I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. Ron arrived then, dropping into the chair beside Harry with the grace of a collapsing tent. He had grass stains on his knees from an ill-advised attempt at training for Quidditch tryouts next year and was carrying a half-eaten sandwich that he was not supposed to have in the library. Madame Pince is going to kill you, Hermione said, eyeing the sandwich. She's got to catch me first. What are we talking about? You both look like someone died, Harry told him, briefly, clearly, without unnecessary drama. The stone, the vault, the dog, the corridor, the attempt at theft. Ron's sandwich sagged in his hand, forgotten. So there's an immortality rock under the school and someone's trying to nick it. Concisely put, Harry said, and you think it's what you know. Don't say it here, Harry cut in, not sharply but with enough weight that Ron closed his mouth. But yes, I think what's left of him is involved. I felt something during the Quidditch match, something attached to Quirrell that shouldn't be there. Quirrell, Ron's face scrunched. The bloke with the turban, he's scared of his own shadow. Exactly. Why would a man terrified of everything take a position teaching defense against the dark arts? Either he's not what he appears, or something is making him what he appears. Hermione was scribbling notes. Ron was staring into the middle distance with the expression of a boy whose worldview was being hastily renovated. Harry watched both of them and made a decision. "This is dangerous," he said. "More dangerous than homework or house points or any of the things this school is supposed to be about. I'm going to deal with it, I have to, because whoever is behind this has already targeted me directly. But I won't ask either of you to be involved. This isn't your fight." Ron looked at him. Hermione looked at him. They exchanged a glance with each other, the kind of wordless communication that develops between people who have spent enough time together to build a shared vocabulary of eyebrow movements. "Don't be thick," Ron said. "Course we're involved. You're our friend. I'm telling you it's dangerous. And I'm telling you I don't care. You're stuck with us, mate." Hermione nodded. "He's right, for once. We're not letting you do this alone." Harry looked at them, these two children, 11 years old, offering to stand beside him against a darkness they couldn't fully comprehend, and felt something crack in the ancient architecture of his chest. A hairline fracture in the wall he'd built around the part of himself that remembered what it was like to have someone stand beside him. Not behind him, not in front of him, but beside him. Enkidu had stood beside him, once, a long time ago. "All right," Harry said. His voice was steady. The crack didn't show. "Then we do this together. But we do it my way, which is, we gather intelligence, we don't rush in, we don't tip off whoever's behind this. We watch Quirrell, we learn everything we can about the stone's protections, and when we move decisively." Ron grinned. "You know, when you talk like that, you sound like a general." "Do I? It's a bit weird, honestly, but also kind of brilliant." Hermione was already making a list. Halloween arrived with a chill wind and the smell of baking pumpkin, and the castle dressed itself in orange and black like a Gothic carnival. Floating jack-o'-lanterns replaced the candles in the great hall. Live bats swooped between the rafters. Hagrid's pumpkins, grown to the size of small cars, lined the entrance. The whole school hummed with the excited, slightly feral energy of children who'd been promised a feast and were counting the hours. Harry felt none of it. October 31st, the anniversary of his parents' death. The night Voldemort had come to Godric's Hollow and murdered James and Lily Potter and tried to murder their son. Harry didn't remember the event. He'd been 15 months old, but the date carried a weight that had nothing to do with memory and everything to do with meaning. This was the night the world had decided who Harry Potter was. The night that had given him his scar, his fame, his orphanhood, and the lightning-shaped brand that marked him as the boy who lived. He sat through his morning classes with his usual attentiveness but said less than usual. Ron, to his credit, noticed and didn't push. Hermione, also to her credit, noticed and pushed exactly once. "Are you all right, Harry?" "I'm fine." She looked at him. "You're not fine, but I won't pry. Thank you." The charms class that afternoon was the first practical lesson on levitation. Professor Flitwick, standing on his customary stack of books, demonstrated the Wingardium Leviosa charm with the enthusiasm of a man who had been teaching for decades and still genuinely loved it. The students paired off, and Ron ended up next to Hermione, which went about as well as putting a cat next to a dog. "You're saying it wrong," Hermione told Ron after his third failed attempt sent his feather rolling off the desk. "It's Wingardium Leviosa, make the gar nice and long." "You do it then if you're so clever." Hermione rolled up her sleeves, swished her wand, and said the incantation perfectly. The feather rose from the desk and hovered in the air, graceful as a bird. Flitwick clapped. "Oh, well done. See here, everyone, Miss Granger's done it." Ron's ears turned the color of a fire hydrant. Harry, who had levitated his feather on the first try without bothering to say the incantation aloud, he was past the point where he needed words to shape his intent, watched the exchange and saw the collision coming. Two insecure people, both desperate to prove themselves in different ways, grating against each other's sharp edges. It would either forge a friendship or create an enemy. He'd seen both outcomes 1,000 times. After class, walking back through the corridor, Ron vented. "It's no wonder she hasn't got any friends. She's a nightmare, honestly." Someone barged past Hermione. Her face was blotchy and her eyes were wet, and she was walking fast, head down, and she didn't look back. Ron realized what had happened about 3 seconds too late. His mouth opened, closed, his ears impossibly went even redder. "She heard me," he said. "She heard you," Harry confirmed. "I didn't mean, yes, you did. You meant it in the moment because your pride was hurt. The question is whether you're the kind of person who lets a moment of hurt pride stand, or whether you fix it." Ron stared at his shoes. Harry waited. He could have lectured, could have delivered a speech about kindness and consequences and the weight of words. Gilgamesh had given speeches like that once from the throne of Uruk. But Harry had learned in this life, if not the last, that people didn't change because you told them to. They changed because they chose to. "I'll apologize," Ron muttered. "After the feast." Harry nodded. Good, but the feast was where things went wrong. The Halloween feast was everything the school had promised: mountains of food, floating pumpkins, a troupe of dancing skeletons performing what appeared to be an interpretive ballet. The Great Hall was a riot of orange light and laughter, and every student in the school was present, except Hermione. Harry noticed her absence the way he noticed everything, automatically, as a data point in the ongoing assessment of his environment. He'd heard from Parvati Patil that Hermione had been crying in the girls' bathroom since Charms and wasn't coming to the feast. The information sat in Harry's mind like a stone in a shoe, not comfortable, not ignorable. Ron was eating with the mechanical determination of someone trying to outrun guilt. Harry was about to say something when the doors to the Great Hall burst open and Professor Quirrell came sprinting in, turban askew, face white, eyes rolling. "Troll," he screamed. "Troll in the dungeons, thought you ought to know." He collapsed in a dead faint. The hall exploded into pandemonium, students screaming, chairs scraping, a stampede of bodies surging toward the exits. Dumbledore rose from the staff table and fired a cannon blast from his wand. Silence, the hall froze. Dumbledore's voice carried the absolute authority of a man who was obeyed not because of his title, but because of the power behind it. Harry watched him and grudgingly acknowledged the technique. When you could silence 500 people with a word, you didn't need to shout. "Prefects, lead your houses back to the dormitories immediately. Teachers, follow me to the dungeons." The organized retreat began. Harry stood and then stopped. Ron caught his sleeve. "Harry, what? Hermione doesn't know about the troll. She's in the bathroom." Ron's face went white. The guilt that had been sitting on his shoulders like a gargoyle suddenly had teeth. Harry was already moving. He peeled away from the Gryffindor procession, slipping through the crowd with the ease of someone who'd been navigating crowds since the first civilization. Ron followed, stumbling, swearing, but following, always following. It was one of the boy's best qualities. When the moment came, Ron Weasley didn't think. He just went. They ran through the corridors. The castle was emptying around them, the sounds of marching students fading as they pushed deeper into the school. Harry's senses were on high alert, Gilgamesh's combat instincts fully engaged, every nerve tuned to the environment. He could smell it before they saw it, a stench like an open sewer, thick and rotten, so powerful it coated the back of his throat. Then they heard it, footsteps, not human footsteps, something massive and heavy and wrong, each impact making the stone floor shudder. Harry rounded the corner and saw the troll. It was 12 feet tall. Gray-skinned, lumpy, built like a boulder that had been taught to walk. It had tiny, stupid eyes set above a nose like a fleshy mushroom, and it was carrying a wooden club the size of a young tree. It was lumbering down the corridor with the slow, inevitable momentum of a natural disaster, toward the girls' bathroom. Ron made a sound that was halfway between a gasp and a whimper. Harry didn't make any sound at all. He assessed the troll in the span of a single heartbeat: size, speed, threat level, vulnerabilities, and his mind, which was the mind of a man who had killed the Bull of Heaven and defeated Humbaba in the Cedar Forest, categorized it instantly. Weak, slow, dangerous to children. Not dangerous to me. The troll reached the bathroom door and smashed through it. Stone and wood exploded inward. From inside, a scream, high, terrified, unmistakably Hermione. Harry moved. He didn't run, he flowed. One moment he was 20 feet behind the troll, the next he was at the shattered doorway, and the speed of his movement left Ron gaping in the corridor. Harry stepped through the ruined door into the bathroom and took in the scene. Sinks smashed, stalls reduced to kindling, water spraying from ruptured pipes, and Hermione pressed against the far wall, white as paper, her mouth open in a scream that had run out of air. The troll was raising its club. The arc of the swing would bring it down on Hermione's head. She had maybe 2 seconds. Harry raised his hand, not his wand, his hand, and for the first time in this life, the gate of Babylon opened. The air behind Harry rippled. Not a lot, not the sky-filling display of golden portals that Gilgamesh had been capable of at the height of his power. A single ripple, a tear in the fabric of space, roughly 2 feet across, glowing with a golden light so intense it turned the water droplets in the air into tiny suspended stars. From within the ripple, something emerged, not launched, not fired, but presented, as if reality itself were handing Harry what he needed. A chain. Golden, gleaming, covered in geometric script that predated every language spoken on Earth. The chain of Enkidu, whose name was woven into the very metal, whose purpose was to bind the divine and the monstrous, to impose order on chaos. It was one of the lesser treasures of the gate, a tool rather than a weapon, and even it radiated a power that made the water on the floor boil into steam. The chain shot from the portal like a striking serpent. It wrapped around the troll's club at the apex of its swing. yanked it from the creature's grip with a force that nearly took the arm with it, and sent it clattering into the wall hard enough to crack the stone. The troll grunted in stupid surprise, staring at its empty hands. Harry pulled the chain back. It coiled around his forearm like a living thing, and the golden portal behind him closed with a sound like a sigh. The troll turned to face him. "Move," Harry said to Hermione. His voice was calm, not tense, not urgent, not performing calm while fighting panic underneath. Just calm, the calm of a king on a battlefield. "Get behind me." Hermione moved. She scrambled along the wall, her shoes slipping on the wet floor, and got behind Harry. The troll watched her go with its tiny, confused eyes, then focused on the small figure that had taken its club. It roared. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, a bellow of animal rage that shook the remaining mirrors from the walls. It charged. 12 feet of muscle and fury, moving faster than something that big had any right to move, bearing down on an 11-year-old boy who weighed maybe 80 pounds soaking wet. Harry sidestepped. It wasn't a dodge, not the frantic, scrambling evasion of someone getting out of the way. It was a sidestep, precise and measured, the kind of movement that martial artists practiced for decades and never quite perfected. Harry moved exactly as far as he needed to and not an inch further, letting the troll's momentum carry it past him, and as it stumbled off balance, he raised his wand and spoke a single word: "Stupefy." The stunning spell hit the troll in the back of the head. A normal stunning spell cast by a normal first year would have bounced off a mountain troll's hide like a tennis ball off a tank. Trolls were resistant to magic, everyone knew that. Their thick skin and tiny brains made them nearly immune to most spells. Harry's stunning spell was not normal. It hit the troll with the force of a cannon shot. The creature's eyes rolled back, its legs buckled. 12 feet of mountain troll collapsed forward like a felled tree and hit the bathroom floor with an impact that cracked the tiles and sent a shockwave of water spraying outward. It didn't twitch. It didn't move. It lay face down in the ruins of the bathroom, completely, thoroughly, utterly unconscious. Silence, except for the sound of running water and Hermione's ragged breathing. Ron appeared in the doorway, his wand out, his face a mixture of terror and awe. He stared at the unconscious troll. He stared at Harry. He stared at the troll again. "Bloody hell," Ron whispered. Harry unwound the chain from his arm. It dissolved as he released it, fading into golden motes of light that drifted upward and vanished like sparks from a fire. The gate closed completely, the golden presence receding back into the depths of his soul, and Harry was once again just a skinny boy in school robes, standing in a destroyed bathroom, breathing normally. "Hermione," he said, "are you hurt?" She was shaking. Her whole body was trembling and her eyes were wide and glassy with shock, but she shook her head. What was that, Harry, what was that?" "The gold light, the chain, that wasn't a spell, that wasn't any magic I've read about." "Later," Harry said. "Teachers incoming." He was right, footsteps, multiple, running. McGonagall burst through the door first, followed by Snape, followed by Quirrell. McGonagall saw the troll, saw the destruction, saw the 3 first-years standing in the wreckage, and her face went through a rapid sequence of expressions: horror, relief, fury, confusion, before settling on the particular brand of outrage that only a teacher who has genuinely feared for her students' safety could produce. "What on earth were you thinking?" she said, and her voice was tight with the effort of not screaming. "You're lucky you weren't killed. Why aren't you in your dormitory?" Hermione stepped forward. She was still shaking, but her voice was steady. "It was my fault, Professor McGonagall. I went looking for the troll. I'd read about them and thought I could deal with it on my own. If Harry and Ron hadn't come and found me, I'd probably be dead." Harry looked at her. She was lying to a teacher, lying smoothly, lying to protect him and Ron from the consequences of leaving the group. Hermione Granger, who followed every rule, who respected every authority, was lying through her teeth because her friends had just saved her life. Something warm and unfamiliar moved through Harry's chest. Not the crack from before, something else, something that felt dangerously like affection. McGonagall stared at Hermione. "Miss Granger, I'm very disappointed in you. 5 points from Gryffindor for your serious lack of judgment." She turned to Harry and Ron. "As for you two, not many first-year students could have taken on a full-grown mountain troll. 5 points will be awarded to each of you for sheer dumb luck." She left. Quirrell lingered, examining the troll with theatrical horror, and Harry watched him. The man's act was good, the trembling hands, the wide eyes, the stammered exclamations. But Harry could feel it again, that cold undercurrent beneath the performance, the wrongness that clung to Quirrell like a shadow's shadow. And there, just for a second, Harry caught it. Quirrell's eyes met his, and behind the fear, behind the act, something else looked out. Something that recognized Harry the same way Harry recognized it, something ancient and hateful and patient. Then Quirrell looked away, muttering about mountain trolls, and the moment passed. Snape hadn't moved. He was standing in the doorway, looking not at the troll but at Harry, and his expression was one Harry hadn't seen before. The habitual contempt was gone, replaced by something more complex. He'd seen what Harry had done, or at least the aftermath. An 11-year-old boy had single-handedly incapacitated a mountain troll, and the evidence was 12 feet of unconscious monster lying on the floor. Snape was too intelligent not to understand what that meant. Their eyes met. Snape held the contact for a beat, 2 beats, and then turned and swept out of the room, his robes billowing behind him. Harry noticed, as Snape turned, that the man was limping. His right leg was injured, the trouser leg dark with what might have been blood. As if he'd recently been somewhere with a very large, very dangerous animal. A 3-headed dog, perhaps. Harry filed this away and led his friends out of the bathroom. The common room was still buzzing with the news of the troll when they arrived. Harry found his chair by the fire and sat, and Ron and Hermione took the seats flanking him, and for a moment the three of them simply existed in the aftermath, processing what had happened. "Are you going to tell us?" Hermione said. Her voice was quiet, controlled, but her eyes were burning with the intensity of someone who had just witnessed something that defied her entire understanding of magic. "Tell you what?" Ron said. "About the golden light, the chain, whatever Harry did in that bathroom." Ron blinked. It was dark, there was water everywhere." "You didn't see it," Hermione said. It wasn't a question. She looked at Harry. "Ron was in the corridor, he didn't see, but I was in the room, I saw it. A portal, Harry, made of golden light, and a chain came out of it. A chain covered in writing that I've never seen before in any book in any language." Harry was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. The common room chattered around them, a bubble of normalcy that surrounded their conversation like a wall. He owed them something. They'd followed him into danger, Ron willingly, Hermione by circumstance, and Hermione had lied to a professor to protect them. They had, in the language of Gilgamesh's court, pledged their loyalty through action rather than words, which was the only kind of loyalty worth anything. "What I'm going to tell you," Harry said slowly, "is going to sound impossible. I need you to listen to all of it before you react." Ron straightened. Hermione leaned forward. Both of them had the sense to not interrupt. "I'm not just Harry Potter," he said. "Or rather, I am Harry Potter completely. I have his memories, his childhood, his life. But I also have more, older memories from a very long time ago." Hermione's breath caught. Ron's brow furrowed. "I am the reincarnation of someone who lived 5,000 years ago," Harry continued. "A king, the first hero in a sense, the man whose story became the template for every hero story that followed. His name was Gilgamesh, and he ruled the city of Uruk in ancient Mesopotamia. He was 2/3 divine, the son of a goddess and a mortal king. And when he died, his soul, my soul, carried forward, through time, through death, through rebirth, until it ended up here. In me." Silence. Ron was staring at him with an expression that suggested his brain had encountered an error message and was attempting to reboot. Hermione's face had gone through surprise, skepticism, calculation, and was now settling into something that looked a lot like the expression she wore when encountering a particularly challenging textbook problem. "Gilgamesh," she said, "the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest written story in history. You know it. My parents took me to the British Museum when I was 8. There was an exhibition on Mesopotamia. I read every plaque." She paused. "You're telling me you remember being him? Not that you've read about him, that you remember." "Yes. And the golden light, the chain, the gate of Babylon, think of it as a vault. A treasury bound to my soul, containing every treasure and weapon I gathered across that lifetime. The chain was one of them. I can access the gate, but only partially. This body, this level of development, I can crack it open. I can't throw it wide." "Yet," Hermione said. Harry met her eyes. "Yet." Ron had been quiet through all of this, which was unusual enough to be noteworthy. He was sitting very still, his freckled face serious, his eyes moving between Harry and Hermione as if watching a tennis match played with concepts instead of balls. "So," Ron said finally, "you're Harry Potter, and you're also an ancient king, from 5,000 years ago, who fought monsters and what gods?" "Yes, and you've got a magic soul vault full of weapons." "Yes, and you took out that troll using a chain from the vault." "Yes." Ron was quiet for another moment, then he nodded slowly with the particular decisiveness of someone who has chosen to believe something not because it makes sense, but because the person telling them has earned it. "Right," he said. "Cool, so what's the plan for the stone?" Harry stared at him. Hermione stared at him. Ron looked back at both of them, bewildered. "What?" "He's my mate. He says he's a reincarnated god king. I believe him. Are we going to sit here all night, or are we going to figure out who's after the bloody stone?" Hermione opened her mouth, closed it, and then, for the first time since Harry had known her, laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a controlled laugh, but a real one, the kind that came from somewhere deep and surprised even the person making it. Harry felt the corner of his mouth twitch, then pull, then against every instinct of the King of Heroes, he smiled. "Ron Weasley," Harry said, "you are an extraordinary person." "Yeah, well, don't let it go to your head." Hermione was still laughing, wiping her eyes, and something had changed between the three of them. Not dramatically, there was no oath, no ritual, no declaration of eternal friendship, just a shift, a settling. The recognition that they were, from this moment forward, bound together by something stronger than shared classes or house loyalty or the accident of sitting in the same train compartment. Trust, freely given and genuinely earned. Harry looked at his two friends and felt the ancient wound in his chest, the Enkidu-shaped hole that nothing had ever filled, not heal, not close, but ease, just a fraction, just enough to breathe a little deeper. They stayed by the fire until the common room emptied, talking in low voices, about the stone, about Quirrell, about the wrongness Harry had felt and what it might mean, about the protections that guarded the third floor and how they might be structured. Hermione took notes. Ron offered tactical suggestions that were crude but occasionally brilliant. Harry listened to both of them and felt, with the quiet certainty of someone who had spent 5,000 years alone, that he was no longer quite as alone as he'd been yesterday. It was a strange feeling, unfamiliar, almost frightening. He held on to it anyway. November hardened into the cold clarity of approaching winter. The grounds frosted silver each morning, the lake developed a skin of ice at its edges, and the students bundled into scarves and cloaks and huddled close to fires. Harry barely noticed the cold. His body ran warm, always had, another gift of whatever divine residue lingered in his blood, and he moved through the frozen corridors in his regular robes while his classmates shivered. The investigation into the stone progressed in fits and starts. Hermione was researching the protections. She'd confirmed the three-headed dog belonged to Hagrid. Its name was Fluffy, which Harry found both absurd and charming, and had identified at least 3 other teachers who were likely contributing defenses. Harry was watching Quirrell, cataloging the man's movements, his habits, his interactions. Ron was doing what Ron did best, talking to people. The Weasley family's extensive Hogwarts network provided a gossip pipeline that rivaled any intelligence service, and Ron fed everything he heard back to Harry with the diligence of a spy who didn't know he was one. The picture was forming, slowly, incompletely, but forming. Quirrell was spending time near the third-floor corridor. Not openly, he was too careful for that, but Harry noticed patterns, late-night movements, conversations with people who weren't there. The faint scent of something dark and herbal that clung to Quirrell's turban and intensified when the man was stressed. And Snape, Harry couldn't ignore Snape. The potions master was also watching Quirrell, with the focused intensity of a hawk watching a snake. The limp from Halloween had healed, but the wariness hadn't. In staff meetings, Harry could read the dynamics from the way teachers interacted at meals. Snape and Quirrell circled each other like dogs who'd agreed not to fight but hadn't agreed not to growl. 2 suspects, or 1 suspect and 1 watchdog. Harry needed more data. Quidditch practice continued through the cold. Oliver Wood was a fanatic who considered hypothermia a minor inconvenience compared to an imperfect Hawkshead attacking formation. Harry trained with the team and found that flying remained the one thing in this world that gave him uncomplicated joy. In the air, the weight of 2 lifetimes lifted. The complexity of the stone, the politics of the school, the ancient grief in his chest, all of it fell away. There was just the wind and the speed and the absolute freedom of a body in flight. He was, by any objective measure, the best seeker Hogwarts had seen in decades. His reflexes were superhuman, his spatial awareness was preternatural, and his instinct for the snitch bordered on the oracular. Wood, who had initially been nervous about fielding a first year, now treated Harry with the reverent intensity of a man who had found his messiah. The second Quidditch match, Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff, was a rout. Harry caught the snitch in under 10 minutes, a diving catch from 200 feet that ended with him pulling up so close to the ground that he left a furrow in the turf. The final score was 210-30. Wood actually kissed the scoreboard. After the match, as Harry was walking back to the castle, he heard footsteps behind him. Quick, purposeful, expensive shoes on frozen ground. He didn't need to turn around. Potter. Harry stopped and turned. Draco Malfoy was standing 10 feet away, alone for once, no Crabbe, no Goyle, no audience. The late afternoon light caught his pale hair and made him look slightly translucent, like a very expensive ghost. His expression was complicated, not the usual sneer, something more genuine underneath it, fighting to the surface through layers of breeding and habit. Malfoy. That was, Draco stopped, swallowed, started again. I've been watching you, all term. In class, in Quidditch, in everything, you're not normal. No, Harry agreed. You're not just the boy who lived. That's a title, that's celebrity, that's, my father says fame is a tool, not an identity. You're something else, I can't figure out what. Harry studied the boy. Draco Malfoy, stripped of his posturing, was almost interesting. There was a brain behind the bluster, a genuine perceptiveness that his father's ideology and his own insecurities usually smothered. Under different circumstances, with different guidance, this boy could be something. What do you want, Draco? The use of his first name startled Malfoy visibly. He recovered fast. The boy had good reflexes, socially speaking. I want to understand you. My father says to watch you. He says you'll be important, one way or another, and it's better to understand the people who will be important. Father sounds like a politician. He is a politician. That wasn't a compliment. Draco's jaw tightened, but he didn't fire back. This, more than anything, told Harry the boy was serious. Draco Malfoy restraining himself was a rare enough event to warrant attention. You offered me your hand on the first day, Harry said, on the train platform. You told me some wizarding families were better than others and offered to help me navigate. I declined because the offer came with conditions. What conditions? The condition that I adopt your worldview, that I accept the premise that blood determines worth. I don't accept that premise, Draco. I've seen too much of the world, more than you can imagine, to believe that power is something you inherit rather than something you earn. You inherited your fame. I inherited a scar and dead parents. The fame was other people's idea. The power is my own. They looked at each other across 10 feet of frozen ground, and something passed between them that was neither friendship nor enmity. Recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement of two people who occupied adjacent positions in a social landscape and would have to deal with each other for years to come. I don't like you, Potter, Draco said finally, but the heat was gone from it. You don't have to like me. You just have to decide what kind of person you want to be, your father's son or something of your own making. Those aren't mutually exclusive. But they're not automatically the same thing either. Draco stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. Harry watched him go and felt the satisfaction of a seed planted. Whether it would grow into something useful was Draco's choice, not his. A king could open doors. He couldn't make people walk through them. December arrived, and with it, the news that Hermione and Ron were both going home for Christmas. Ron's family tradition. Hermione's parents, who were apparently the sort of people who celebrated the holidays with aggressive cheerfulness and dental hygiene gift baskets. Harry was staying at Hogwarts. You could come with us, Ron offered. Mum wouldn't mind. She already thinks you're too thin. I appreciate it, Harry said, and meant it, but I have things to do here. He had more than things to do. He had an investigation to conduct without the distraction of normal school routines, and the nearly empty castle at Christmas provided the perfect operational environment. But there was more to it than that, and he knew it. The truth, the one he didn't say aloud, was that the idea of spending Christmas with someone else's family, surrounded by someone else's warmth, was more than he could handle right now. The loneliness of the cupboard had been terrible, but it had been his. A king's solitude, self-imposed and self-sustained. Accepting comfort meant accepting vulnerability, and he wasn't ready. Not yet. Ron and Hermione left on the express, both of them extracting promises that Harry would write. He waved them off from the platform and walked back to the castle through the first snow of winter, his footprints the only marks on the white ground. Hogwarts at Christmas was a different creature. Quiet still, the corridors empty and echoing. The castle's magic, freed from the task of managing 500 children, seemed to relax into something older and deeper. The fires burned warmer, the ghosts were more talkative. Even the portraits seemed livelier, freed from the obligation to pretend they weren't watching. Harry used the time. He explored every corridor, every staircase, every hidden passage. He found rooms that weren't on any map, a chamber full of clocks that all showed different times, a hallway where the floor was made of glass, and beneath it was a garden that bloomed in perpetual twilight, a door that only appeared when you walked past it 3 times thinking about what you needed. That door was interesting. Harry walked past it 3 times, thinking clearly about what he needed, and the door appeared, heavy oak, iron-banded, and behind it was a room that contained exactly what he'd been looking for: space. A large, empty chamber with high ceilings and stone walls, lit by torches that adjusted to his mood. A training room. A place where a king could practice without being observed. He spent hours there each day, not practicing spells, though he did that too, working through the upper-year curriculum with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had centuries of learning experience. He practiced with the gate, sitting in the center of the room, cross-legged, eyes closed, reaching inward. The Gate of Babylon was closer to the surface here. The ambient magic of Hogwarts, combined with the room's apparent ability to provide what was needed, created an environment where the golden doors practically hummed with eagerness. Harry pushed against them, carefully, controlled, not forcing them open but learning their mechanism, their weight, their resonance. He could open the gate wider now than he'd been able to in October. The chain had been a breakthrough, the first full materialization of a treasure from the vault in this lifetime, and it had established a neural pathway, a groove in his magic that subsequent summonings could follow. He practiced calling individual items, small things at first, a golden goblet that refracted light into rainbows, a dagger with a blade that never dulled, a shield boss etched with the seal of Uruk. Each summoning was easier than the last. The gate was responding to him, recognizing its master, and every successful call widened the opening by a fraction. Harry could feel the deeper treasures stirring, the great weapons, the legendary armaments, the things that had made Gilgamesh the most feared warrior in the ancient world. They were there, they were waiting, but they required a capacity that his body hadn't yet developed. The mana cost, or whatever the wizarding equivalent was simply too high for an 11-year-old, even one with the soul of a demigod. Patience, growth, time. He had all three. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright, and Harry woke to find a pile of presents at the foot of his bed. This was unprecedented. In 11 years at the Dursleys, he had never received a Christmas present. The sight of wrapped packages with his name on them produced an emotion so unexpected that he sat on the bed for a full minute just looking at them. A hand-knitted sweater from Mrs. Weasley, emerald green to match his eyes, with a box of homemade fudge. The warmth of the gesture was almost physically painful. Ron's mother, who had never met him, had knitted him a sweater, had included him in the family tradition, had thought of him. A box of chocolate frogs from Ron, a book on advanced transfiguration theory from Hermione, a crudely wrapped package from Hagrid that turned out to be a hand-carved wooden flute, and one more. A package wrapped in silver paper with no name on the tag, just a note: "Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well." Harry unwrapped it. A cloak, silvery fluid shimmering like liquid moonlight. He knew what it was before he put it on. The description matched. The magic radiating from it was unmistakable. An invisibility cloak. He draped it over his shoulders and looked down. His body had vanished. He was invisible from the neck down, and when he pulled the hood up, he disappeared entirely. A treasure. Not from the gate, from his father. From James Potter, who had owned this cloak and left it behind when he died. And someone, the unsigned note carried the faint scent of lemon drops and old parchment that Harry had come to associate with Dumbledore, had returned it now. On Christmas, when the castle was empty and a boy might be tempted to explore. Harry held the cloak and thought about it. A gift from Dumbledore, returned at a moment calculated to be emotionally significant. With a note designed to appeal to sentimentality, "Your father," and implicitly grant permission, "Use it well." This was not a random act of kindness. This was a chess move. Dumbledore was giving Harry a tool and seeing what he did with it. "You want to know what I'll do with freedom," Harry thought. "You want to see where I go when no one's watching. All right." He'd show the old man something. Harry put on the cloak and went hunting, not for the stone, not yet. He wasn't ready for a direct confrontation with whatever guarded the third floor, and more importantly, he wasn't ready for a confrontation with whatever lurked behind Quirrell's turban. The wrongness he'd felt at the Quidditch match, that cold, rotten presence, was not something to approach carelessly, even for the King of Heroes. He went hunting for information. The restricted section of the library yielded books on advanced protective enchantments. The staff corridor near the third floor yielded observation of the security patterns when the teachers checked how often which routes they took. And a seemingly unremarkable door on the fourth floor yielded something he hadn't expected: a mirror. It was standing in an empty classroom, tall and ornate, with a gold frame and an inscription carved across the top: "Eris stra eruoit ube cafruoit on wosi." Harry read it backward: "I show not your face, but your heart's desire." He looked into the mirror. And the King of Heroes, who had seen wonders and horrors beyond mortal imagination, who had stood before gods and not flinched, who had faced death and the underworld and the crushing finality of human mortality, the King of Heroes made a sound. A small sound, barely audible. The kind of sound that escapes when something breaks that you didn't know was still intact, because the mirror was not showing him his parents. It was not showing him fame, power, the Philosopher's Stone, or any of the things that the mirror of Erised might logically show to a boy in Harry's position. The mirror was showing him Enkidu, not a memory, not a ghost, a presence. Standing beside his reflection, exactly as they had stood beside him 5,000 years ago, tall and beautiful and wild, with green hair like a forest and eyes like the earth and a smile that was the only thing in any world that had ever made Gilgamesh feel less alone. Enkidu, his equal, his other half. The being created by the gods specifically to match him, to challenge him, to teach him what it meant to love something more than yourself. In the mirror, Enkidu put a hand on his reflection's shoulder. Harry's knees buckled. He caught himself on the frame. His hands were shaking, the first time they'd shaken since he was 6 years old, crouching in a garden shed while the memories broke open like a dam. His eyes were burning, his chest was a hollow cavern where something that had once been a heart was screaming. "You're not real," he whispered. "You can't be, you're the mirror, you're what I desire, not what is." The reflection of Enkidu tilted their head, that familiar gesture. That curious, gentle, slightly teasing expression that said, "I know you better than you know yourself, and I find you amusing." Harry pressed his forehead against the glass. It was cold, real. The mirror was a magical artifact of extraordinary sophistication, and it was doing exactly what it was designed to do, showing him the deepest, most desperate desire of his heart. And his heart, ancient and battered and scarred by millennia of loss, desired only one thing. "Come back, please, just come back." He stood there for a long time. The empty classroom was dark and silent around him, and the only light came from the mirror, which glowed with a faint, warm luminescence that might have been magic or might have been something else. When he finally stepped back, his face was wet. He wiped it with the back of his hand, roughly, the way someone wipes away evidence. He was Harry Potter. He was the king of heroes. He did not cry in empty classrooms over a grief that was 5 millennia old, except that he did, because grief didn't care about crowns or lifetimes or the pretense of strength. Grief was the one enemy that even Gilgamesh couldn't defeat, and the mirror had just reminded him of that with the surgical precision of a blade finding the gap in armor. He pulled the invisibility cloak around himself and left the room. He came back the next night, and the next. Each time he told himself it would be the last. Each time the mirror showed him Enkidu, and each time the sight cracked him open like a shell and left the raw, desperate boy underneath exposed. On the third night there was someone waiting in the classroom. "I thought you might come back," Dumbledore said. He was sitting in an armchair that hadn't been there before, wearing a dressing gown of deep blue covered in silver stars, and his expression was gentle in a way that Harry immediately distrusted. Not because it was false, it seemed genuine, but because gentleness, in Harry's experience, was often the prelude to manipulation. Harry pulled off the invisibility cloak. There was no point pretending. "The mirror," he said, "you put it here." "I did. It's being moved tomorrow to a more permanent location, where it will serve as one of the protections for the stone." Dumbledore's blue eyes flickered, the tiniest crack in the grandfatherly facade. "You know about the stone." "I know about the stone, the break-in at Gringotts, the three-headed dog, and the fact that someone in this castle, someone connected to what's left of Voldemort, is trying to steal it. I've known for months." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The silver instruments on the desk he'd presumably brought with him. No, there was no desk. Just the armchair and the mirror and two people in a dark room with too much history between them. "You are a remarkable young man, Harry. Don't patronize me." The words came out sharper than Harry intended. Or maybe they came out exactly as sharp as he intended. The old man in the armchair was not what he appeared, not a kindly grandfather, not a benevolent headmaster. He was a power player, a chess master, a man who had orchestrated Harry's introduction to the wizarding world with the precision of a military campaign and was now, right now in this moment, trying to determine how much control he still had over the board. "You gave me the invisibility cloak," Harry continued. "On Christmas, when the castle was empty. You wanted me to explore, you knew about the mirror, you expected me to find it. The question is why? What were you hoping I'd see?" Dumbledore's expression shifted. The gentleness remained, but underneath it something else surfaced. Respect maybe, or the discomfort of a strategist encountering someone who could see the strategy. "The mirror of Erised shows us the deepest desire of our hearts," Dumbledore said carefully. "I had hoped, I confess, that I would learn something about you by what you saw. And did you? You've been coming here for 3 nights. Whatever you see, it moves you deeply. I have some guesses, but I won't presume to know." "You won't, because it's none of your business." Harry's voice was level but carried an edge that could have cut glass. "Professor Dumbledore, I respect your intelligence, your power, and your position. But I need you to understand something clearly and completely, so there is no ambiguity between us." Dumbledore waited. "I am not a piece on your board," Harry said. "I am not a weapon to be shaped, a symbol to be managed, or a child to be guided toward conclusions you've already reached. I know more about this world and about the nature of power than you imagine. I will attend your school, learn from your teachers, and respect the rules that deserve respect, but I will not be handled. If you have information that concerns me, I expect you to share it directly, not through breadcrumb trails and orchestrated discoveries. I am not your pawn, Dumbledore. I am nobody's pawn." The classroom was very quiet. Dumbledore looked at Harry, and for the first time since their interaction began, the mask was fully down. No twinkle, no gentle grandfather, just a very old, very powerful, very tired man who was looking at an 11-year-old boy and seeing something that defied every expectation he'd ever held. "My boy," Dumbledore said softly, "what are you?" "I'm Harry Potter," Harry said, "and that's all you need to know for now." He picked up the invisibility cloak, folded it carefully, and walked to the door. On the threshold he paused. "The mirror," he said without turning around. "It shows heart's desire, not illusion. There's a difference." "Indeed there is." "Then you should know that what I desire isn't power or fame or the stone. It's a person. Someone I lost a very long time ago. Someone I'll carry with me for as long as this soul endures." He walked out, leaving Dumbledore alone with the mirror. And Albus Dumbledore, who had spent over a century accumulating wisdom and power and the quiet certainty that he understood the world better than anyone in it, sat in his armchair and stared at the space where Harry Potter had been. Then he looked into the mirror himself. He saw Ariana. He always saw Ariana. And for the first time in a very long time, Albus Dumbledore wondered if he had finally met someone who understood loss the way he did. Chapter 4, The Mirror and the Mongrel. The snow had buried Hogwarts in white by the time the students returned from Christmas break, and the castle woke from its holiday stillness like a great beast shaking off sleep. Trunks banged up staircases, owls descended in flurries, and the great hall filled again with the clatter and chatter of 500 young witches and wizards who had eaten too much over the holidays and were not remotely ready to resume their education. Harry was in the common room when Ron came through the portrait hole, pink-cheeked from the cold, lugging his trunk with one hand and a sandwich with the other. "Harry," Ron dropped the trunk with a bang that made a nearby second-year jump. "Happy New Year. Mum sent you more fudge and another sweater. She says you're too thin. She's never even met you and she's already decided you're too thin. I appreciate your mother's concern for my body mass. Don't say it like that. It sounds weird." Ron collapsed into the chair beside him and took a massive bite of his sandwich. "How was Christmas? Did anything happen?" "Did you find anything about, He dropped his voice. Several things happened. I'll tell you when Hermione arrives. She's right behind me." She was interrogating Neville on the train about some herbology essay. Hermione appeared 5 minutes later, flushed and slightly breathless, her hair wilder than usual from the winter wind. She dropped her bag on the table and looked at Harry with the intensity of someone who had spent 2 weeks thinking about golden chains and ancient kings and was ready for answers. "Tell us everything," she said. Harry told them. Not everything. He kept the mirror's vision of Enkidu to himself because that was a wound he wasn't ready to share, but enough. The invisibility cloak. His exploration of the castle, his observations of Quirrell and Snape, his confrontation with Dumbledore. "You told Dumbledore you weren't his pawn," Ron said, his sandwich forgotten halfway to his mouth. To his face, "Yes, and he didn't, expel you, turn you into something. He's not going to expel me, Ron. He needs me more than I need him, and we both know it." Hermione was chewing her lip, a habit she had when processing information at speed. The mirror of Erised, you said it's being moved to protect the stone. It's one layer of the defense. I've identified at least 6. Fluffy, Professor Sprout's contribution, probably a plant-based trap, Flitwick's charms, McGonagall's transfiguration puzzle, Snape's logic in the mirror. There may be more. And you think Quirrell is the one trying to get through them? I think whatever is behind Quirrell is the one trying. Quirrell is the vehicle, the driver is something else. Ron swallowed. "You mean I mean Voldemort. I mean what's left of him. He lost his body 10 years ago, but he didn't die. Something survived, something parasitic, something that needs a host, and I think it found one in Quirrell." The fire crackled. A group of third years burst through the portrait hole, laughing about something, and the sound was jarring against the weight of the conversation. "So what do we do?" Hermione asked. "We wait, we watch. And when Quirrell makes his move, because he will, eventually, we're ready." "Ready to do what?" Harry looked at her, and his green eyes held something that made Hermione's breath catch, not fear, not threat, but a depth of certainty that no 11-year-old should possess. "Ready to stop him," Harry said simply. January and February passed in a rhythm of classes, snow, and careful surveillance. Harry attended his lessons, excelled without apparent effort, and maintained the quiet, watchful composure that his classmates had learned to accept as simply the way Harry Potter was. The novelty of the boy who lived had faded somewhat, replaced by the more practical novelty of the boy who was top of every class, the youngest seeker in a century, and possessed of a presence that made prefects unconsciously step aside in corridors. Hermione threw herself into research with the fervor of the truly obsessed. She had compiled a dossier on Nicholas Flamel that would have impressed a professional historian, cross-referencing alchemical texts with historical records and magical theory. The Philosopher's Stone, she reported, was not merely a transmutation device, it was a crystallization of pure magical essence, a solidified concept closer to a magical philosophy made manifest than a simple object. The elixir of life it produced didn't just extend life, it sustained the drinker in a state of perpetual vitality, essentially overriding the natural process of aging. "It's cheating," Harry said when she explained this. They were in the library, their usual table, snow falling past the windows. "Cheating, immortality through an external source. You're not conquering death, you're leasing additional time from an artifact. Moment the stone is destroyed or the elixir runs out, you're mortal again. It's dependency, not transcendence." Hermione gave him a look. "You sound like you have strong opinions about immortality." "I have experience with the subject." She waited, but he didn't elaborate. Hermione had learned over the past months that Harry's silences were not evasions, they were boundaries. He shared what he chose to share, and pushing produced nothing but a polite, impenetrable wall. She respected the boundary. She also catalogued every silence, every oblique reference, every moment where the ancient king bled through the boy's facade, building her own private understanding of who Harry really was. She was, Harry reflected, going to be formidable when she grew up. She was already formidable now. Ron's contribution to the investigation was characteristically indirect but surprisingly valuable. He maintained his social network, chatting with students from every house, picking up gossip and rumors with the ease of someone who'd grown up in a large family where information was currency. Through Ron, Harry learned that Quirrell had been seen entering the Forbidden Forest at night. That Snape had confronted Quirrell in a corridor and the conversation had been heated. That Dumbledore had left the castle twice since Christmas, both times unexpectedly. Hagrid's been acting odd too, Ron reported one evening, chewing a licorice wand, more secret than usual. "I went down for tea last week and he practically shoved me out the door." "He's hiding something," Harry agreed, "but Hagrid's secrets tend to be more enthusiastic than malicious. We should visit." They went the following Saturday. Hagrid's cabin sat at the edge of the Forbidden Forest like a friendly tumor on the landscape, rough-hewn, slightly crooked, with smoke curling from the chimney and a massive crossbow leaning against the door. Hagrid welcomed them in with his usual overwhelming warmth, settled them at a table that was slightly too large for the room, and put the kettle on. The cabin was stiflingly hot. A fire roared in the grate, far too large for the season, Harry noted, and Hagrid kept glancing at it with a nervousness that was entirely unlike him. "How have you been, Harry? Enjoying school? Classes going well?" "Everything's fine, Hagrid. You seem worried about something." "Me? Worried? Nah. Number everything's grand. Tea." Harry took the offered mug, sipped politely. Hagrid's tea could strip paint, and waited. Patience was a weapon, and Hagrid, for all his loyalty, had the secret-keeping ability of a sieve made of good intentions. Hermione spotted it first. Her eyes had been scanning the cabin. She couldn't help herself. She catalogued every environment she entered, and they landed on the fireplace, specifically on the object sitting in the heart of the flames. "Hagrid," she said slowly. "Is that an egg?" It was. A large, black, rough-textured egg, sitting directly in the fire, glowing with heat, not burning, incubating. Hagrid went red. Yeah, you weren't supposed to see that." "Is that a dragon egg?" Ron said, and his voice had the particular reverence of a boy whose brother worked with dragons and who had grown up on stories of them. "Hagrid, that's a dragon egg. Where did you get a dragon egg?" "Won it, off a stranger in the pub. He seemed glad to be rid of it, to be honest." Harry set down his tea. The warmth he'd felt had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with the sudden, sharp clarity of a piece falling into place. "A stranger in a pub," Harry repeated, "who happened to have a dragon egg and happened to be willing to part with it in a card game. Yeah, nice fella, kept his hood up, but..." "Did he ask you anything, Hagrid, about Hogwarts, about what you do here, about the protections?" Hagrid's face, already red, went the color of brick. He might have been curious about the sorts of creatures I look after. Professional interest, I reckoned, and I might have mentioned Fluffy, just in passing. He was interested in how you handle big beasts, and I said the trick with Fluffy is you just play him a bit of music and he goes straight off." He stopped. The color drained from his face so fast it was like watching a balloon deflate. "I shouldn't have said that," Hagrid whispered. "No," Harry said, "you shouldn't have." Silence, except for the crackle of the fire and the faint sound of something shifting inside the egg. Hermione had her hand over her mouth. Ron was staring at Hagrid with an expression of dawning horror. "The stranger knew what he was doing," Harry said, and his voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "He targeted you, Hagrid. He knew you were the keeper of the keys, he knew you had information about the protections, and he traded you a dragon egg, an illegal possession that would get you in serious trouble if discovered, in exchange for the one piece of information he needed: how to get past the first line of defense. You think it was someone after the stone. I think it was someone working for the person who's after the stone, or the person himself." Harry paused. What did this stranger look like? Anything you remember? Size, voice, hands. He kept his hood up, like I said. Big bloke, didn't talk much, kept buying me drinks. Hagrid's voice was small and miserable. He had pale hands, I remember that, sort of twitchy. Quirrell's hands, pale and twitchy. Harry had watched them tremble over a teacup in the staff room enough times to recognize the description. Hagrid, listen to me carefully, Harry said. The stone is in danger. I need you to go to Dumbledore tonight and tell him what you told us. About the stranger, about Fluffy, about the music, everything. Dumbledore's not here, Hagrid said, and his voice cracked. Got an owl this morning, ministry business. He left for London. The room went very still. Harry looked at Ron. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Harry. He's gone, Harry said softly. Dumbledore's gone. Could be coincidence, Ron offered without conviction. It's not coincidence. Someone lured him away. A false summons, a manufactured crisis. It doesn't matter what. What matters is that the one person in this castle who could stop a direct attempt on the stone has just been removed from the board. He stood up. The motion was fluid, controlled, and something in the quality of it, the absolute absence of hesitation, made the other three people in the room look at him with an attention that went beyond the ordinary. It's tonight, Harry said. If I were making a move on the stone, this is when I'd do it. Dumbledore gone, students in their dormitories, teachers off guard. Quirrell knows how to get past Fluffy now. He'll go tonight. Then we go to McGonagall, Hermione said firmly. We tell her everything. She's deputy headmistress. She can. And if she doesn't believe us, 3 first-years with a theory about a defense professor and a Dark Lord, how does that conversation go, Hermione? We don't have proof. We have a chain of inference that only makes sense if you accept premises that most people in this world won't even consider. So what then? We just let him take it. No, Harry said, we don't let him take it, but we try McGonagall first. You're right about that. If the system works, we use the system. If it doesn't, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They found McGonagall in a corridor on the first floor, walking briskly with an armful of parchment and the harried expression of someone managing a castle in its headmaster's absence. Professor, Harry said, stepping into her path, we need to speak with you. It's urgent. Mr. Potter, I'm rather busy. The Philosopher's Stone is going to be stolen tonight. McGonagall stopped walking. Her eyes went sharp behind her spectacles. She looked at Harry, then at Ron and Hermione flanking him, and her expression cycled through surprise, irritation, and the particular wariness of someone who knew Harry Potter well enough to not dismiss anything he said out of hand. How do you know about the stone? She asked, her voice low. That's not the relevant question, Professor. The relevant question is, does it matter how I know if I'm right? Someone has obtained the method for bypassing the first protection. Dumbledore has been called away, and I don't believe the timing is coincidental. The attempt will be made tonight. McGonagall studied him. The corridor was empty. Their voices echoed faintly off the stone walls. Mr. Potter, the stone is perfectly safe. The protections in place are more than sufficient. The protections were designed by the faculty, and the person making the attempt has had months to study the faculty. He's been inside the castle, Professor. He's been watching, learning, preparing. Protections are only as strong as their weakest point, and the weakest point has already been compromised. Something flickered in McGonagall's face. Not disbelief, she was too intelligent for that. Discomfort, rather. The discomfort of a professional being told by a child that the security she'd helped build might not be enough. I assure you, she said carefully, that no one can get past the protections without music, Harry said. The 3-headed dog, Fluffy, falls asleep when it hears music. That information was extracted from Hagrid by an individual who deliberately targeted him. The first layer is compromised. If the first layer is compromised, the rest become a matter of time and determination, and the person making this attempt has both. McGonagall's lips pressed into a thin line. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, I will increase patrols on the 3rd-floor corridor tonight, and I will attempt to contact Professor Dumbledore. Does that satisfy you? It's a start. It's all you're going to get, Mr. Potter. Whatever you think you know about the stone, you are a first-year student, and you will return to your dormitory and stay there. Is that understood? Yes, Professor. She nodded curtly and continued down the corridor. Harry watched her go. She doesn't believe us, Ron said. She believes us more than she's letting on, but she's constrained by protocol and hierarchy. She can't authorize a full security response on the word of 3 children, not without undermining the staff's authority and causing a panic. So what now? Harry turned and walked toward the staircase. His pace was faster than usual. Not rushed, Harry never rushed, but purposeful, each step carrying the weight of a decision already made. Now we go to the 3rd floor. Hermione grabbed his arm. Harry, McGonagall just told us to go to our dormitory. She did, and you're going to ignore her. Yes, you can't just. She stopped, took a breath. Released his arm. "You're going regardless of what I say." "Yes, but I'd rather not go alone." It was, perhaps, the most honest thing Harry had said all year. Not a request for help. The King of Heroes didn't need help to face a stuttering professor and whatever dark parasite clung to him, but an admission that he wanted them there, that their presence mattered to him. That somewhere in the ancient, armored fortress of Gilgamesh's soul, a door had opened for these two, and he wasn't going to close it. Ron didn't hesitate. "I'm in." Hermione looked at them both. Her expression was a battlefield, duty and rules, and the carefully constructed framework of authority she'd built her identity around, all warring against the things she'd learned this year that mattered more than any of it. "If we get expelled for this," she said, "I will never forgive either of you." "Noted," Harry said. They moved. The third-floor corridor was dark and silent, and the door at the end was ajar. Harry saw it from 20 feet away and felt something tighten in his chest, not fear, but the cold focus of a warrior recognizing that the battle had already begun. The door should have been locked. It wasn't. Someone had already been through. From behind the door, a soft sound. Music, a harp playing itself, an enchanted instrument left behind by whoever had gone ahead. And beneath the music, a deep, rumbling vibration that was the three-headed dog asleep. "The harp," Hermione whispered. "Someone's already in and through. Yes, stay behind me." Harry pushed the door open. The room beyond was enormous, its walls lost in shadow, and Fluffy filled most of it, a monstrous three-headed canine the size of a small house, its 6 legs curled beneath it, all 3 heads resting on massive paws, drool pooling on the stone floor. The enchanted harp sat in the corner, its strings plucking themselves in a gentle melody that kept the beast in a deep, snoring slumber. Beneath Fluffy's paw, a trapdoor. Harry could feel the magic beneath it, layers of enchantment, each one distinct, each one bearing the signature of a different caster. The gauntlet. He crossed the room without hesitation. Ron and Hermione followed, their footsteps featherlight on the stone. Harry reached the trapdoor, pulled it open, and looked down into blackness. "I'll go first," he said. "Harry," he dropped. The fall was short. He landed on something soft, something that moved, and immediately recognized the trap. The surface beneath him was alive. Vines, thick and strong, were coiling around his legs and torso with the purposeful constriction of a plant that knew exactly what it was doing. Devil's snare. Ron landed beside him with a yelp, and Hermione a moment later, and both of them immediately began struggling as the vines seized them. The plant tightened in response. Devil's snare fed on panic, constricting harder the more its prey fought. "Stop moving," Hermione shouted. "It's Devil's snare. It likes the dark and damp. Stop struggling. It'll only kill you faster." "Oh, well, that's a comfort," Ron gasped, a vine wrapping around his throat. Harry didn't struggle. He was completely still, lying in the grip of the plant like a man reclining in a chair, and the vines around him loosened in confusion. Their prey wasn't fighting, wasn't panicking, wasn't providing the resistance they needed to trigger the constriction reflex. But Harry wasn't interested in waiting for the plant to lose interest. He raised his wand, Lumos Solemn. The spell was a standard light charm amplified. When a normal first-year cast it, it produced a beam of bright light. When Harry cast it, what erupted from his wand was a miniature sun, a sphere of blazing white-gold radiance that turned the entire chamber into a furnace of light. The Devil's snare shrieked. Not audibly, but the magical register of a plant in agony as every vine recoiled simultaneously, releasing all 3 of them and retreating into the walls like a nest of snakes hit with a torch. They dropped through the loosened mass and landed on the stone floor below. Ron gasped for air, rubbing his neck where the vine had gripped him. Hermione was shaking but already on her feet. "Sprout's contribution," Harry said. "1 down." The next chamber contained keys. Hundreds of them flying around the room on tiny wings like a flock of chrome birds. A broomstick hovered in the center of the room, and a heavy wooden door waited at the far end, its lock conspicuously large. Harry surveyed the flying keys. Flitwick's work, elegant, whimsical, requiring flight and precision, a test of skill and nerve. He could have used the broomstick, could have chased the correct key through the cloud, caught it, opened the door. That was the intended solution, a puzzle designed to test a specific set of abilities. Harry pointed his wand at the door. Alohomora, the lock clicked, the door swung open. Ron and Hermione stared, but the keys, the broomstick, Hermione sputtered. "The protections were designed to be solvable," Harry said, walking through. "They're tests, not walls, which means they have solutions, and the simplest solution is usually the right one. You just brute forced a Hogwarts security system with a first-year unlocking charm. The lock was designed to respond to a specific key, but a lock is still a lock, and my Alohomora is not a first-year's Alohomora." The next room was dark and cold and smelled of dust and stone. As they stepped inside, torches flared along the walls, revealing an enormous chessboard. Life-sized pieces, carved from what appeared to be black and white marble, stood in their starting positions. The white pieces faced the door. The black pieces waited on the far side. McGonagall's Hermione breathed. Ron stepped forward. His eyes were moving across the board with a focus and intensity that neither Harry nor Hermione had ever seen from him before. This was Ron's domain. He'd been playing chess since he could sit up. His family's battered set was one of the few things he'd brought to school, and he was, by any measure, brilliant at it. Not good, not talented. Brilliant, the kind of player who saw 12 moves ahead and played with an intuition that bordered on prophecy. "We have to play our way across," Ron said. His voice was different, quieter, more certain. The gangly, insecure boy who worried about living up to his brothers had vanished, replaced by someone who had found, at last, the arena where he was king. "Harry, you take the bishop's square. Hermione, you're the castle. I'll be a knight." They took their positions. The white pieces moved first. Ron played. And watching him play, Harry felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, genuine admiration. Not the intellectual appreciation he gave to Hermione's brilliance or the strategic respect he afforded Dumbledore's machinations. This was the admiration of a king for a natural talent, the recognition that he was watching someone do the thing they were born to do. Ron directed their pieces with calm authority, sacrificing pawns, setting traps, thinking 5, 8, 10 moves ahead. The White Queen was savage. McGonagall had apparently encoded her own tactical ruthlessness into the piece, and she swept across the board, taking black pieces with a violence that made the stone floor shake. Ron adapted, pivoted, found angles, but the board was closing in. "There's only one way," Ron said quietly. He was pale and his hands were clenched at his sides, but his voice was steady. "I need to be taken." "Ron," Hermione started. "Listen, if I move here, the Queen takes me. That puts Harry in position to checkmate the king. There's no other line. I've looked." "Find another line," Harry said. His voice was flat, controlled. But underneath the control, something was building, a pressure in his chest, a heat behind his eyes. "There isn't one, Harry. I've run it 6 ways. This is the only move." "I said find another line." Ron looked at him, and for the first time the boy from the train, the gangly kid with the sandwich and the self-doubt and the smudge on his nose, looked at the King of Heroes with an expression of absolute resolve. "This is my move, Harry." "Let me make it." Harry stared at him, and in that stare was 5,000 years of history, of friends lost, of Enkidu's death, of the hollow in his chest that nothing could fill. The King of Heroes had watched his only equal die once. The idea of watching someone else sacrifice themselves, even in a chess game, even in a contest that might not be lethal, even in a situation where the stakes were unknowable, triggered something in him that went deeper than strategy or logic. "Ron, trust me," Ron said, and smiled. A lopsided, ridiculous, entirely Ron smile that made him look like exactly what he was, a brave, loyal, slightly mad 11-year-old boy who had decided to do the right thing and wasn't going to be talked out of it. Harry closed his eyes, opened them. "Make your move." Ron stepped forward. The White Queen turned. She crossed the board with terrible purpose, her stone arm raised, and struck Ron with a blow that sent him sprawling across the floor. He hit the stone and didn't move. "Ron," Hermione screamed, lunging toward him. "Don't break ranks." Harry's voice cracked through the room like a whip. Hermione froze, tears streaming. "He's breathing, he's alive. We finish this. Now." Harry moved to the square Ron had designated, looked at the White King, and said in a voice that carried the weight of 5 millennia of command, "Checkmate." The White King dropped his sword. The pieces parted. The way was clear. Hermione was already at Ron's side, checking his pulse, her wand out. "He's unconscious. Concussion probably, maybe a broken rib. He needs the hospital wing. Take him." "Harry, I can't leave you." "Hermione." He knelt beside her. His hand found her shoulder and the touch was firm and warm and steady. "Take Ron to the hospital wing. Find McGonagall. Tell her everything. Then send an owl to Dumbledore. I don't care how. Use Hedwig. Use the school owls. Use a carrier pigeon if you have to. Get Dumbledore back here." "What are you going to do?" "What I was always going to do. Finish this." She looked at him, and the fear in her eyes was not for herself but for him, and that made it harder to bear. Harry had been feared, worshipped, hated, and admired across 2 lifetimes. But being worried about, genuinely, personally worried about, was still new enough to hurt. "Come back," she said. "Harry, you have to come back." "I will." He stood, turned, walked through the doorway and didn't look back, because looking back would have meant seeing their faces, and seeing their faces would have meant feeling something he couldn't afford to feel right now. Not when he was walking toward a confrontation with whatever remained of the darkest wizard in modern history. The room beyond the chess chamber was a troll, already dealt with, unconscious on the floor, an even larger specimen than the one from Halloween, a bump the size of a grapefruit on its head. Someone had gotten here first and handled it. Quirrell presumably, though Harry didn't waste time analyzing the methods. He stepped over the troll's outstretched arm and moved on. The next room was Snape's. A table lined with bottles, a roll of parchment, and a wall of purple flame blocking the way forward. Black flame blocked the way back. Harry read the parchment. A logic puzzle. 7 bottles, 3 poison, 2 wine, 1 to move forward, 1 to go back. The clues were clever, a chain of deductive reasoning that required careful attention to language and sequence. Hermione would have loved it. Harry solved it in about 30 seconds, not because it was easy, but because a mind that had governed an empire and waged wars across the ancient world could handle a logic puzzle with the same effort most people spent tying their shoes. The bottle that moved forward was tiny, barely a swallow. He drank it and felt the potion coat his insides with cold. Then he stepped through the purple flames and entered the final chamber. The mirror of Erised stood in the center of the room, exactly as it had stood in the empty classroom at Christmas. Its golden frame caught the torchlight. Its surface was dark and still. In front of the mirror, his back to Harry, stood Professor Quirrell, no turban. His head was bare and wrong. Harry could see it immediately, the shape of the skull, the way the skin moved, the suggestion of something beneath the surface that didn't belong. Quirrell's hands were raised, and he was staring into the mirror with the desperate intensity of a man trying to crack a code he couldn't comprehend. "I see myself presenting the stone to my master," Quirrell muttered, "but how do I get it?" "The mirror, it shows what I want, but it won't give. The mirror shows desire, not reality," Harry said, stepping into the room. "You could stand there until the stars burn out and it wouldn't give you anything." Quirrell spun. And the man who faced Harry was not the trembling, stuttering professor who jumped at loud noises and couldn't meet anyone's eyes. This Quirrell stood straight. His eyes were hard and clear and utterly without fear. The stammer was gone. The act was gone. What remained was a man who had made a terrible choice and was committed to seeing it through. "Potter," Quirrell said, "I wondered if you'd come. I'm sure you did. You're cleverer than they say. Most think you're just a lucky child with a famous scar. But I've watched you all year. You're something else entirely, aren't you?" Harry didn't answer. He was reading the room, the mirror, the exits, the magical currents in the air. And beneath it all, that presence, the wrongness, cold and dark and rotten, emanating from Quirrell like heat from a furnace, except this heat went the wrong way. It pulled warmth in, leaving a void that made Harry's skin crawl. "Where is he?" Harry asked. Quirrell's face twitched. "I don't know what." "Don't insult me, Quirrell. I've felt him since September. At the Quidditch match, in the corridors, every time you got close enough for the stench to reach me. He's here, he's on you. Show me." Quirrell stared at him. Then slowly he reached up and began to unwrap something from the back of his head. Not a turban, the turban was already gone. But there were wrappings, layers of cloth wound tight around the back of his skull, and as they fell away, the smell intensified. Rotten cold and something sulphurous, something fundamentally opposed to life. Quirrell turned around. The face on the back of his head was the most terrible thing Harry had ever seen. Not because of its appearance, though it was horrifying. Chalk-white skin stretched over alien features, red eyes like slits, nostrils but no nose, but because of what it was. Harry's soul, the soul of Gilgamesh, the king of heroes who had walked through the underworld and returned, recognized what he was looking at with a visceral revulsion that transcended any single lifetime. A broken soul, a shattered thing, a human being who had deliberately, methodically torn his own essence apart and distributed the pieces like a man scattering seeds. What remained, this face, this presence, this voice, was a fragment, an echo of something that had once been whole and had chosen to destroy itself in pursuit of the one thing Gilgamesh had learned 5,000 years ago was never worth the price: immortality. "Harry Potter," said the face. The voice was high and cold, thin as a wire, carrying the particular resonance of something that existed between life and death and had chosen to dwell there permanently. "We meet again, Voldemort," Harry said. The name didn't tremble in his mouth, didn't catch or falter. It was just a name, and Harry said it the way you'd name any broken thing, with precision and without fear. "Yes," Voldemort hissed. "See what I have become, shadow and vapor, reduced to this, sharing the body of a faithful servant because of what you did to me. A baby, a child. Do you know what that is like, Potter, to be unmade by an infant? I can guess it stings." The red eyes narrowed, defiant. "Your parents were defiant too. Your father first, he stood against me without a wand, brave but foolish. And your mother, she needn't have died. She was trying to protect you. She died begging." "She died fighting," Harry said, and his voice carried a weight that made the torches flicker. "She died choosing death over submission. That's not begging. That's something you'll never understand because you've spent your entire existence running from the one thing every living creature has to face." The chamber went cold, not metaphorically. The temperature actually dropped, the moisture in the air crystallizing into tiny ice crystals that hung suspended like stars. Voldemort's presence was expanding, pressing against the walls, filling the room with the psychic weight of a being that had defied the natural order so thoroughly that reality itself recoiled from him. "You dare." "I dare everything," Harry said. "You want to know what I see when I look at you, Voldemort? Not a dark lord, not a monster, not even a threat. I see a coward. I see a man so terrified of death that he butchered his own soul to escape it, and in doing so became something less than human. You pursued immortality and achieved this, a parasite on another man's skull, skulking through a school, desperate for an artifact you can't even retrieve." He stepped forward, one step. His eyes were blazing, and behind them, behind the green, something else was looking out. Something golden, something ancient. Something that made Voldemort's stolen face twitch with an emotion the Dark Lord had not felt in decades: uncertainty. "I have pursued immortality too," Harry said, and his voice was no longer entirely the voice of an 11-year-old boy, deeper, older, carrying the harmonic resonance of a soul that had lived before, that had crossed the waters of death and spoken with the one mortal who had achieved what Voldemort sought. "I walked to the edge of the world to find it. I held the plant of eternal youth in my hands, and I learned the lesson that you, in all your brilliance and all your depravity, were too much of a coward to learn." "And what lesson is that?" Voldemort's voice was a hiss, but beneath the contempt something was listening. Something that recognized, on a level deeper than conscious thought, that the boy in front of him was not merely a boy. "That death is not the enemy," Harry said. "Death is the door, and the only people who fear it are the ones who never truly lived." Silence. The ice crystals hung in the air. The mirror gleamed. And Tom Riddle, Lord Voldemort, the self-made Dark Lord who had terrorized a nation, looked into the eyes of the King of Heroes and saw, for the first time in his wretched half-existence, something that was older and greater and more terrible than himself. "Kill him," Voldemort whispered. "Kill him now." Quirrell moved. His hands came up, magic gathering at his fingertips, not a wand spell but raw, dark, desperate power, the kind of magic you threw when finesse was no longer an option. A killing bolt aimed at Harry's chest. Harry raised his hand. The gate of Babylon opened, not a crack, not a sliver. Not the careful, measured opening he'd practiced in the room of requirement, pulling single items from the treasury with the delicacy of a jeweler handling gems. The gate opened wide. The air behind Harry split apart. Golden light erupted into the chamber, not a single portal but a cascade, a constellation, a dozen points of golden radiance that tore through the fabric of space and hung in the air like the eyes of a god. The temperature reversed. The cold of Voldemort's presence met the blazing warmth of the king's treasury and burned away like frost in sunlight. The ice crystals vaporized. The torches roared. The shadows fled to the corners and cowered there. Quirrell's killing bolt hit something invisible 3 feet from Harry and shattered like glass against a wall. A barrier, not a shield charm, not a magical defense, but the passive emanation of so much concentrated magical power that hostile spells simply couldn't penetrate the field. From the portals, weapons emerged, not all of them, not even a fraction, but enough. Blades of silver and gold and materials that had no names in modern languages. Spears that hummed with barely contained fury. An axe whose edge burned with white fire. They hung in the air behind Harry like a halo of war, each one pointing at Quirrell, each one trembling with the eagerness of things that had been waiting 5,000 years to serve their king again. Quirrell staggered back. His face was white, not with the pallor of Voldemort's influence, but with raw, animal terror. Whatever he'd expected from Harry Potter, it wasn't this. This was power on a scale he couldn't process, from a source he couldn't identify, operating on principles that bore no resemblance to anything in the magical world he understood. What are you?" Quirrell gasped. "I am the King of Heroes," Harry said, and the words came from both halves of him, the boy and the king, the orphan and the demigod, unified in this moment into something greater than either alone. "I am the ruler of everything that was, and the treasury of all the world's treasures answers to me. You are standing in the presence of power that predates your Dark Lord, your magical world, and every institution you've ever known." A blade detached from the constellation, a short sword, simple in design but radiating an authority that made the air warp around it and floated to Harry's hand. He gripped it and the weapon sang. "Surrender," Harry said. "Release Quirrell, leave this place, you are beaten." Voldemort laughed. It was a terrible sound, thin, high, fractured, the laughter of something that had long since lost its grip on anything resembling joy. "Beaten by a child with parlor tricks, I am Lord Voldemort. I have conquered death itself. No weapon can." Harry flicked his wrist. The sword moved, not a thrust, not a slash, but a gesture, the barest motion, and a crescent of golden energy erupted from the blade and carved a trench in the stone floor 6 inches from Quirrell's feet. The stone didn't just break, it unmade itself. The matter in the trench simply ceased to exist, leaving a gap in the floor that went down to bare earth. The laughter died. "The next one won't miss," Harry said. "I'll ask once more. Surrender. Kill Him." Voldemort shrieked, all pretense of composure gone. "Seize Him, the stone, get the stone." Quirrell lunged. Not with magic this time, with his hands reaching for Harry's throat, driven by the desperate, override all rational thought command of his master's will. His fingers closed around Harry's neck, and then Quirrell screamed. The sound was unlike anything that had ever echoed in these chambers. Not a scream of pain, a scream of dissolution. Where Quirrell's skin touched Harry's, the flesh was blistering, blackening, crumbling. Smoke poured from the contact points. Quirrell reeled back, staring at his hands, his ruined, charred, disintegrating hands, and screamed again. Harry looked at his own skin where Quirrell had touched him. Unmarked, warm, faintly golden, his mother's protection. The love sacrifice that had saved him as a baby. But filtered through the soul of the King of Heroes, amplified by the gate's open presence, it was no longer a passive shield. It was an active rejection, a fundamental incompatibility between the power of love sacrifice and the corroded, soul-shattered thing that Voldemort had become. Quirrell, saturated with Voldemort's presence, literally could not touch Harry without being destroyed. "Your mother's protection," Voldemort hissed, understanding hitting him even as his host crumbled. "Love, the old magic I should have. You should have done many things," Harry said, "but you didn't, and now you're going to leave." He stepped forward. Quirrell stumbled back, his hands raised, his body failing. Voldemort was screaming through his host, orders, threats, curses, but the sound was fading, thinning, as if the Dark Lord was being pulled away from the surface by a current he couldn't resist. Harry raised his hand, his bare hand, glowing faintly with golden light, and pressed it against Quirrell's forehead. The effect was instantaneous. Quirrell's eyes went wide, then blank, then empty. His body convulsed once, twice, and then went still. Something dark and formless tore free from the back of his skull with a sound like ripping cloth. A shadow, a vapor, a wraith, and Voldemort's face dissolved into smoke and fury. The wraith hung in the air for one heartbeat. Its red eyes, the only solid part of it, found Harry's, and what it saw looking back at it was not an 11-year-old boy. It was the King of Uruk, standing in the light of his open treasury, surrounded by the weapons of legend, blazing with a power that made Voldemort's century of dark magic look like a candle in the sun. The wraith fled. It tore through the ceiling like a dark wind, shrieking, scattering, desperate to escape, and then it was gone, and the chamber was empty except for Harry and the mirror and the collapsed form of Quirinus Quirrell. The gate of Babylon closed, the weapons faded. The golden light dimmed, then vanished, and Harry Potter was once again a thin, scarred boy in school robes, standing in a stone chamber, breathing hard. He knelt beside Quirrell. The man was alive, barely. His hands were destroyed, his face was gray, his breathing was shallow and rapid. But his eyes were open, and for the first time all year they were his eyes. No darkness behind them, no passenger, just a frightened, broken man who had made a terrible choice and paid for it in flesh. "Hold on," Harry said quietly. "Help is coming." Quirrell's lips moved, no sound came out. But his eyes, his own eyes, clear of Voldemort's influence for the first time in months, found Harry's face and held there. Something in them that might have been gratitude, or shame, or the peculiar peace of a man who had been carrying something unbearable and had finally been freed from the weight. Harry sat with him. The mirror gleamed behind them, and if Harry had looked into it now, he would have seen the same thing he'd seen at Christmas in Kiddu, standing beside him, a hand on his shoulder, but he didn't look. He looked at Quirrell's ruined hands and shallow breathing, and thought about the cost of power, and the price of choices, and the difference between mercy and weakness. Then the door burst open, and Dumbledore was there. The headmaster moved with a speed and purpose that belied his age, his wand drawn, his blue eyes blazing. Behind him, McGonagall, Snape, Madame Pomfrey, the cavalry arriving at the final curtain. Dumbledore took in the scene in a single sweeping glance, the unconscious Quirrell, the destroyed floor, the lingering traces of golden energy in the air, and Harry, sitting calmly in the middle of it all, looking up at him with an expression that combined exhaustion with pointed vindication. "I believe," Harry said, "I mentioned something about increased security." Dumbledore's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. It might have been something else. "Poppy, see to Professor Quirrell. Severus, secure the chamber. Minerva, I owe Mr. Potter an apology. Albus." McGonagall's voice was tight with emotion, anger at herself mostly for not listening, for following protocol when she should have followed instinct. She looked at Harry with an expression that was raw and real and entirely without the professional distance she usually maintained. "You were right," she said. "I should have listened." "You did what you thought was correct, Professor. No apology necessary." "There is every apology necessary. You're 11 years old and I sent you to bed while I chose to come down here. The responsibility is mine." Their eyes met and something passed between them, a mutual recognition of the kind of person the other was. McGonagall was a woman who valued duty and rules and the structures that kept chaos at bay. Harry was someone who valued all those things but would burn them to the ground if innocent people were at risk. They were different, but they understood each other. And understanding, in Harry's experience, was worth more than agreement. Snape was examining the trench in the floor. His fingers traced the edge where stone became nothing, the clean, absolute cut of power that didn't merely destroy but erased. He looked up at Harry and his expression was something Harry had never seen on that sallow, guarded face. Awe, genuine, unconcealed, almost involuntary awe. "Potter," Snape said, "what did you do? What was necessary?" Snape stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned back to the trench and said nothing, and the silence said everything. Dumbledore was kneeling beside Quirrell, his wand moving in complex patterns over the man's body. Diagnostic magic, healing magic, the precise and powerful work of the most accomplished wizard in Britain. He worked in silence for several minutes, then straightened and turned to Harry. "Voldemort," he said, not a question, "what's left of him?" He was possessing Quirrell, sharing his body, feeding off him like a parasite. And now, gone, the wraith fled. He's not dead. You can't kill something that's already done what he's done to himself, but he's been separated from his host and driven out of the castle. Dumbledore's eyes searched Harry's face, looking for fear, looking for trauma, looking for the shock and damage that any normal child would exhibit after a confrontation with the darkest wizard in living memory. He found none of those things. What he found, looking into Harry Potter's green eyes, was the steady, ancient, bone-deep weariness of someone who had been fighting monsters since before Dumbledore's civilization existed. And beneath the weariness, something harder, something that looked like resolve. "The stone," Harry said, "what happens to it? It will be destroyed." Harry blinked. Of all the answers he'd expected, that wasn't one. "Destroyed. Nicholas and I have discussed it. The stone has been more trouble than it is worth. Nicholas has enough elixir stored for a comfortable transition. He and Perenelle will die." The word sat in the air between them. "They chose this," Harry asked. "They chose this. After 600 years, they have decided that it is time." Harry was quiet for a moment, then he nodded, a slow, deep nod that carried the weight of personal understanding. Of all the people in this castle, he was perhaps the only one who truly comprehended what the Flamels were choosing and what it had taken to reach that choice. "They're braver than anyone will ever know," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him, and for one unguarded moment, the headmaster's expression was not that of a chess master or a politician or the leader of the wizarding world. It was the expression of an old man who had spent his life surrounded by people who couldn't understand him, encountering improbably someone who could. "Yes," Dumbledore said softly, "they are." The moment passed. Madame Pomfrey was insisting that Harry come to the hospital wing, and McGonagall was agreeing with a vehemence that suggested she would physically carry him if necessary. Harry allowed himself to be led away. At the door he paused. "Dumbledore." "Yes, Harry." "I told you I wasn't your pawn, I meant it. But I also want you to know I'm not your enemy. This Voldemort, whatever's left of him, he'll be back. He's too stubborn and too broken to do anything else. When he comes, I intend to finish it, not because of prophecy or destiny or the expectations of your world, because it needs to be done and because I can." Dumbledore regarded him. The twinkle was back in his eyes, but it was different now, less the sparkle of a man with a secret and more the gleam of genuine, hard-earned respect. "I believe you, Harry, I believe you absolutely." Harry nodded and walked out. Behind him, Dumbledore stood in the chamber and looked at the mirror, and then at the trench carved into the stone, and then at the door through which an 11-year-old boy who was not remotely an 11-year-old boy had just walked. "Minerva," he said quietly, to the empty room. "Yes, Albus," she was at the door having lingered. "In all my years, and they have been many, I have never encountered a student like Harry Potter." "No," McGonagall said, "I don't imagine you have. I thought I was prepared for him. I planned for every contingency. An orphan, abused, yearning for guidance and acceptance. A boy I could shape and protect and guide toward his destiny. And instead," Dumbledore looked at the trench in the floor one more time. The clean, absolute erasure of stone by a power that didn't belong to any magical tradition he'd studied in over 100 years of life. "Instead," he said, "I got a king." Chapter 5, Through Fire and Eternity. The hospital wing was white and quiet and smelled of clean linen and healing poultices, and Harry hated it immediately. Not the care. Madame Pomfrey was efficient and skilled and genuinely concerned, but the stillness. The enforced passivity of lying in a bed while someone else decided when you were well enough to leave. The King of Heroes did not do well with confinement. He'd spent 10 years in a cupboard. He'd spent enough time in small spaces for several lifetimes. But his body, for all its remarkable resilience, was 11 years old and had just channeled more power through the gate of Babylon than it had ever sustained before. The exhaustion hit him roughly 20 minutes after Pomfrey settled him into a bed, and it hit like a wall falling on him. Not sleepiness, depletion. The magical equivalent of a sprinter who'd just run a marathon. His reserves were gutted. The gate, which normally hummed at the edges of his consciousness like a distant furnace, was barely a flicker. He pushed too hard, opened too wide, and the body that housed the king's soul was letting him know in no uncertain terms that there would be consequences. He slept for 14 hours. When he woke, it was mid-morning. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long rectangles of gold across the white floor. The hospital wing was empty except for 3 beds, his and 2 others nearby, both occupied. Ron was in the bed to his left, propped up on pillows, his head bandaged, eating a pile of chocolate frogs with the methodical intensity of someone working through a rehabilitation program. Hermione was in a chair between their beds, reading a book that was roughly the size of a cinder block, and she looked up the instant Harry's eyes opened. "He's awake," she said, closing the book with a snap that startled Ron so badly he dropped a frog. "Oi, don't do that," I nearly choked. "You've been out for 14 hours, Hermione said to Harry, ignoring Ron entirely. Madame Pomfrey said it was magical exhaustion. She's never seen reserves that depleted in someone your age. She said it was like you'd cast 100 adult-level spells in the space of minutes." "Something like that," Harry said. His voice was rough. He reached for the water glass on the nightstand and drank, and the cool liquid grounded him, pulled him back into his body. He took stock, tired but functional. The gate was still dim, a candle where there was usually a bonfire, but it was there. It would recover, he would recover. The body was resilient and growing, and each time he pushed its limits, the limits expanded. "What happened?" Ron demanded, leaning forward so aggressively that his pillow fell off the bed. "After the chess game, Hermione wouldn't tell me anything. She said she wanted to wait until you were awake, which is the most annoying thing anyone has ever done to me, and my brothers once turned my teddy bear into a spider." Harry told them. He told them about Snape's logic puzzle, about the room with the mirror, about Quirrell without his turban and the face on the back of his head. He told them about the conversation, Voldemort's taunts, his own response, the moment when the Wraith had looked through borrowed eyes and seen not a boy but a king. He told them about the gate opening wide, the weapons, the golden light, the confrontation that ended not with a spell but with a touch. He left out the exact words he'd spoken to Voldemort about immortality. Some things were for the darkness and the enemy, not for the light and your friends. When he finished, Ron was sitting perfectly still, a half-eaten chocolate frog melting in his forgotten hand. Hermione had her fingers pressed to her lips, her eyes bright with the particular intensity of someone processing information that was simultaneously terrifying and fascinating. "You opened the gate," Hermione said, "fully, multiple portals, more than I've ever managed before. More than I should have attempted, honestly. The body wasn't ready for it. But you did it. The situation required it. Harry," she leaned forward, "you fought Voldemort, you drove him out. Do you understand what that means? The entire wizarding world has been terrified of this person for decades. Adults, trained Aurors, ministry officials, they won't even say his name, and you faced him down at 11 years old and won." "I didn't win," Harry corrected. "I drove off a wraith, a fragment. Whatever Voldemort was before, the wizard who terrorized Britain, that's not what I fought. I fought the ghost of him. The echo, and even that echo was..." He paused, considered his next words. "He was pathetic," Harry said, and meant it. Not weak, there was genuine power there, and the possession of Quirrell gave him a physical platform to channel it through. But pathetic, a soul so damaged, so fragmented that it couldn't maintain a body of its own. He split himself, Ron, Hermione, his soul, deliberately, multiple times. Whatever magic he used to avoid death, it required him to tear pieces off his own essence and anchor them to something, objects, places, I don't know. But the result is what I felt in that chamber, a being that is less than human, less than alive, less than dead. Something caught between states, sustained by will and darkness and nothing else. Horcruxes, Hermione breathed. Harry looked at her sharply. "What? I read about them. Not in detail, the books in the regular library barely mention them. But there's a reference in Magic Most Evil, a single paragraph, almost a footnote. A Horcrux is an object in which a dark wizard has hidden a piece of their soul. It's the darkest magic known to exist. The book said it was too evil to describe in detail." "Of course you've read about the darkest magic known to exist," Ron muttered. "The reference was in a footnote in a book I was reading for background on defensive theory. I wasn't looking for it." "Horcruxes," Harry repeated. The word felt right. It named the shape of the wrongness he'd felt. "Multiple, you said. The book only described the concept of one, but if what you're saying is true, that his soul is fragmented, plural, then he's made more than one, which is, she trailed off, her face pale, which is supposed to be impossible, making even one Horcrux requires an act of supreme evil. Murder, cold-blooded, premeditated murder tears the soul, and then a specific ritual anchors the fragment to an object. Doing it once is monstrous, doing it multiple times would be exactly what Voldemort would do, Harry finished. He feared death above all things. One safety net wouldn't be enough. He'd want redundancy. Multiple anchors, multiple pieces. The implications hung in the air like smoke. If Voldemort had created multiple Horcruxes, then he couldn't be killed, truly killed, until every fragment was found and destroyed. Driving off the Wraith was a tactical victory. Ending the war would require a campaign. This changes things, Harry said quietly. This isn't a single confrontation. This is a hunt, and it won't be finished at Hogwarts. But not today, Hermione said firmly. Today you're in a hospital bed recovering from magical exhaustion, and Madame Pomfrey said. Madame Pomfrey said he needs rest, not excitement, and yet here you two are providing the opposite, said Madame Pomfrey herself, materializing at the foot of Harry's bed with the silent efficiency of someone who had been catching students out of bed for decades. Mr. Weasley, eat your chocolate. Miss Granger, stop agitating my patient. Mr. Potter, lie down. Harry, who had fought gods and monsters and the wraith of the darkest wizard in modern history, lay down. Some battles weren't worth fighting. They released him the next morning. Ron came with him, his head still bandaged but his appetite fully recovered, which Pomfrey took as a reliable indicator of neurological function. They walked into the great hall for breakfast, and the room went quiet. Not silent, not the dramatic pin-drop silence of a crowd witnessing something shocking, just quiet. A subtle dimming of the noise, a turning of heads, a ripple of awareness moving through the student body like a stone dropped in a pond. Word had gotten out. It always got out. Hogwarts was a castle full of teenagers, and keeping secrets in such an environment was roughly equivalent to keeping water in a sieve. The details were garbled, of course. Harry had fought a troll. Harry had fought 10 trolls. Harry had fought Snape. Harry had dueled Dumbledore himself. Harry had found a secret chamber beneath the school and battled a dark wizard using some kind of golden magic that nobody had ever seen before. The versions multiplied and contradicted each other, but the core truth was consistent. Harry Potter had done something extraordinary, something beyond the scope of any first-year student, something that even the teachers were talking about in hushed voices when they thought no one was listening. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down. He poured himself tea. He selected toast. He ate breakfast with the calm, precise movements that his housemates had learned to recognize as simply Harry being Harry, and the room gradually returned to its normal volume. Neville was the first one who came over. He sat down across from Harry with a plate of eggs and a nervous expression and said without preamble, "I heard you went through the trapdoor." "I did, and that you fought someone down there. Also true." Neville looked at his eggs, looked at Harry. His round face was working through an emotion that he didn't have the vocabulary for, something between admiration and confusion and a particular variety of shame. "I should have been there," Neville said. I heard Ron and Hermione talking about going and I wanted to help, but I was afraid. I thought about trying to stop you actually because I thought you'd get hurt or get Gryffindor in trouble, and he swallowed. I just stood there." Harry set down his tea. "Neville," he said, "look at me." Neville looked at him. His eyes were bright with the particular misery of a boy who believed he had failed. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Harry said. "It's the decision that something matters more than the fear. You were afraid and you still wanted to help. You were afraid and your instinct was still to protect, even if that meant trying to stop us. That's not cowardice, that's someone who hasn't yet learned to trust his own bravery. But I didn't do anything. This time, but you will. I've seen enough people in my life to know the difference between someone who lacks courage and someone whose courage hasn't been called yet. Yours will be called, Neville, and when it is, you won't hesitate." Neville stared at him. The misery was still there, but underneath it, something else was taking root, fragile, uncertain, but real. The seed of a belief that maybe, possibly, the boy everyone overlooked might be more than what he seemed. "How can you know that?" Neville asked. "Because I've been reading people longer than you can imagine," Harry said, "and I've never been wrong. It was, strictly speaking, an exaggeration. Gilgamesh had been wrong about plenty of people. He'd been wrong about the gods, wrong about his own invincibility, wrong about the possibility of immortality. But he had never been wrong about courage. He could spot it across a battlefield, across a room, across a crowded dining hall. And Neville Longbottom had it in quantities that would have made most soldiers jealous. Neville nodded slowly, then went back to his eggs, but he sat a little straighter, and the misery in his face had receded just enough to let something else through. Not confidence, not yet, but the precursor to it. The willingness to believe that confidence might one day be possible. Harry watched him eat and felt the quiet satisfaction of a king who had identified a future knight. Dumbledore called Harry to his office that afternoon. The headmaster's office was a circular room at the top of a spiral staircase, accessed through a gargoyle that responded to confectionery-based passwords. Harry noted this and filed it away. The whimsy was deliberate, a layer of approachability over a man who was anything but simple. The room itself was cluttered with silver instruments that whirred and clicked, portraits of former headmasters pretending to sleep, and a magnificent phoenix perched on a golden stand near the desk. The phoenix interested Harry more than anything else in the room. It regarded him with bright, intelligent eyes, fire-colored, ancient, knowing, and something passed between them. Not recognition, exactly, but resonance. The phoenix could feel what Harry was, and Harry could feel what the phoenix was, and they understood each other on a level that had nothing to do with language. "Fawkes has taken a liking to you," Dumbledore said, gesturing to a chair. "He's usually more reserved with visitors." Harry sat. The phoenix trilled a soft note, a sound like liquid gold, and the tension in Harry's shoulders eased by a fraction. Phoenix song. It had properties that went beyond the auditory, healing, comfort, the reinforcement of hope. Harry appreciated it without surrendering to it. He was here for a conversation, not a therapy session. "You wanted to see me," Harry said. "I did. I owe you several things, Harry, an explanation, an apology. And perhaps a conversation that is long overdue. Let's start with the explanation." Dumbledore laced his fingers on the desk. He looked old today. Not merely elderly old in the bone-deep way of someone who had been carrying weight for too long and was beginning to feel the strain. The twinkle was absent. The grandfatherly warmth was banked. What remained was a man being genuine, and Harry respected that enough to listen. 10 years ago, Dumbledore began, "I placed you with the Dursleys. I know. You know the fact. I want you to understand the reason. Your mother's sacrifice created a protection, ancient magic, older than wands, older than Hogwarts. A blood protection, anchored to her living relatives. As long as you could call your mother's bloods home your home, Voldemort could not touch you there. The protection was powerful, absolute, and entirely dependent on you remaining with your aunt. So you left me in a cupboard for 10 years to maintain a defensive ward." The words were flat. Not angry. Harry had processed his anger about the Dursleys long ago, had filed it away in the vast archive of injustices he'd absorbed across 2 lifetimes. But the flatness was its own kind of accusation, and Dumbledore heard it. "Yes," Dumbledore said, "I did. And I have spent 10 years questioning whether it was the right decision. It wasn't, perhaps not, but the alternative was finding a placement that provided both safety and care, a wizarding family under your protection. The Weasleys, the Longbottoms, any of a dozen families who would have taken me in gladly. You chose the most secure option and assumed that security was sufficient. It wasn't. A child needs more than protection, Dumbledore. A child needs to be wanted." Dumbledore closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were bright, and Harry realized with a start that the old man was close to tears. Not the performative emotion of a manipulator, real tears, the kind that came from a wound so old it had become part of the landscape. "You are right," Dumbledore said, "and I am sorry, truly, deeply sorry. I made a choice based on fear, my fear of Voldemort's return, my conviction that the blood protection was paramount, and in doing so I failed you in the most fundamental way a guardian can fail a child. I prioritized your survival over your happiness. I told myself it was necessary. I'm no longer certain that was true." Harry looked at him for a long time, the old man at the desk, carrying his guilt like armor, offering it now as an act of trust. Dumbledore was not accustomed to apologizing. You could see it in the tension of his jaw, the careful precision of his words. This was costing him something real. "I accept your apology," Harry said. "Not because what happened was acceptable, but because holding on to it serves neither of us. I learned things in that cupboard that I might not have learned elsewhere. Patience, self-reliance, the difference between being alone and being lonely. Those lessons have value even if the method of teaching was cruel. You are remarkably forgiving for someone who has every right not to be. I'm not forgiving you, I'm choosing to move forward. There's a difference." Dumbledore inclined his head. The distinction mattered, and they both knew it. "Now," Harry said, "the overdue conversation." Dumbledore straightened slightly. The vulnerability retreated, not disappeared, but was set aside, making room for the strategic mind underneath. "There is a prophecy," Dumbledore said, "made before your birth by a seer named Sybil Trelawney. I was present for its delivery. It speaks of a child born at the end of July, to parents who had thrice defied Voldemort, who would have the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. It was this prophecy that drove Voldemort to Godric's Hollow." He heard a portion of it, the first part, and interpreted it as identifying you as the threat to his power, and the rest of it, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies. The words hung in the air. Harry absorbed them without visible reaction, processing each phrase with the analytical precision of a mind that had evaluated thousands of intelligence reports across 2 lifetimes. Power the Dark Lord knows not, Harry repeated. Your interpretation, I believed it was love, your mother's sacrifice. The capacity for love and connection that Voldemort, through his choices, systematically destroyed in himself. And now, Dumbledore looked at him and the old eyes were sharp. Now I believe it may be something far more vast than I imagined. Whatever you are, Harry, and I say this with full awareness that you have been less than forthcoming about the specifics, you possess a power that Voldemort cannot comprehend. I saw the chamber. I saw what you did to the stone floor. That was not any magic I recognize. Not wizarding magic, not accidental magic, not dark or light or anything in between. It was something else entirely. It was, will you tell me what? Harry considered. He'd told Ron and Hermione. They had earned it through action, through loyalty, through the kind of trust that was forged in danger and cemented by shared experience. Dumbledore had not earned the same trust, not yet, but the old man was offering something real: honesty, vulnerability, a willingness to see Harry as a partner rather than a piece. And the conversation about Horcruxes, about the long campaign ahead, meant that Dumbledore's knowledge and resources would be essential. I am the reincarnation of an ancient soul, Harry said. Not a past life in the way your psychics might describe it, not vague impressions or scattered memories. A full, complete, continuous identity. The soul that inhabits this body lived before, thousands of years ago, in a time when magic operated on different principles and at a different scale. I carry the memories, the knowledge, the instincts, and a portion of the power of that previous life. It's been surfacing since I was 6. By now, the integration is nearly complete. Dumbledore listened without interruption. His expression was that of a man having a fundamental assumption about reality gently demolished. The golden light, he said. The weapons, the power you displayed, artifacts from that previous life, bound to my soul, not my body. Accessible through a mechanism I call the gate, a soul-bound treasury that contains every significant object I gathered across a lifetime of conquest and rule. I can't access it fully yet. This body needs to grow, to mature, to develop the capacity to channel that level of power. But it's there, all of it, waiting. And who were you in this previous life? Harry met his eyes. I was a king, the first king in many ways, the one whose story became the story of every king and hero that followed. I ruled an empire, fought gods, crossed the boundary of life and death, and ultimately learned the hardest lesson any immortal can learn, that mortality is not a curse. It's a gift. Dumbledore was very still. Behind him, Fawkes trilled another note, and the sound seemed to underscore the gravity of the moment. 5,000 years, Dumbledore said softly, give or take, and you're 11. The body is 11, the mind is complicated. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, productive. The silence of 2 powerful minds recalibrating to a new reality. This changes everything I thought I knew, Dumbledore said finally. It doesn't change what needs to be done. Voldemort has Horcruxes, multiple, I believe. They need to be found and destroyed. He will return in one form or another, and when he does, the wizarding world needs to be ready. These facts are unchanged by my identity. But the approach, the strategy is what it's always been. Intelligence, preparation, and the willingness to act decisively when the moment comes. The only difference is that you now have an asset you didn't know you had. An asset, Dumbledore's mouth curved. Somehow I don't think you're comfortable being called an asset. I'm comfortable being useful. I'm not comfortable being managed. There's a distinction. One you've made before, if I recall. And one I'll continue to make until you stop needing to hear it. Dumbledore looked at him, and something in the old man's face shifted one final time. The calculation was still there, would always be there, because Dumbledore was fundamentally a strategist and you couldn't take the chess out of the player. But layered over it was something newer, something fragile, something that looked a great deal like the beginning of a partnership between equals. I have spent my entire life, Dumbledore said, accumulating power and influence and wisdom, and using all 3 to hold back the darkness. I have done it largely alone because I believed, arrogantly perhaps, that no one else could be trusted with the full picture, that I alone had the perspective and the judgment to navigate the complexities of the war against Voldemort. He paused. Took a breath. I am beginning to think, he said, that I have been wrong about that. You have been, Harry said without malice, but wrong can be corrected. That's the advantage of being alive. Dumbledore smiled, a real smile, tired, crooked, human. Will you work with me, Harry? Not for me, not under me, with me, as partners in this endeavor. Harry looked at the old man. 150 years of power, wisdom, and mistakes, sitting across the desk from a soul that was 5,000 years old and had made mistakes of its own. Neither of them was purely good, neither of them was free of blood. But both of them wanted the same thing, to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves and to stop a broken monster from devouring the world. Yes, Harry said, I'll work with you on one condition. Name it. No more secrets, not the important ones. You tell me what you know about Voldemort, about the Horcruxes, about the prophecy, about everything that's relevant to this fight, and I'll do the same. The moment either of us starts hiding things from the other, the partnership ends. You have my word, and you have mine. They shook hands across the desk. The old man's grip was firm, his skin papery but warm. Harry's grip was steady, his hands small but certain. 2 hands, 2 lifetimes, 1 purpose. Fawkes sang. The last days of term passed in a blur of exams, sunshine, and the particular bittersweet energy of a school year ending. Harry took his exams and topped every subject, not by a little, but by margins that made the examiners go back and check their scoring. Hermione came second, and the look she gave Harry across the great hall when the results were posted was a mixture of respect and naked competitive fire that promised years of academic warfare. The end-of-year feast was a riot of color and noise. The great hall was draped in green and silver. Slytherin had won the House Cup, thanks to Snape's generous point awarding to his own students throughout the year. The Slytherin table was celebrating with the smug satisfaction of a team that had won on points if not on merit. Dumbledore stood. The hall went quiet. Harry watched from the Gryffindor table, flanked by Ron and Hermione, and felt the familiar tension of someone who knew something was about to happen. Another year gone, Dumbledore said, his voice carrying the easy authority of a man addressing a crowd that adored him. And I must trouble you with an old man's wheezing wastebasket before we sink our teeth into our delicious feast. What a year it has been. Hopefully your heads are all a little fuller than they were. You have the whole summer ahead to get them nice and empty before next year starts. Now, as I understand it, the House Cup here needs awarding, and the points stand thus. In 4th place, Gryffindor with 312 points. In 3rd, Hufflepuff with 352. In 2nd, Ravenclaw with 426. And in 1st, Slytherin with 472. A storm of cheering and stamping erupted from the Slytherin table. Draco Malfoy was banging his goblet on the table. Harry waited. Yes, yes, well done, Slytherin, Dumbledore continued. However, recent events must be taken into account. The room went still. Harry felt Ron tense beside him and put a hand on his arm. Wait. First, to Mr. Ronald Weasley, for the best played game of chess Hogwarts has seen in many years, I award Gryffindor House 50 points. Ron's face went the color of a sunset. The Gryffindor table erupted. Percy was telling anyone who'd listened that Ron was his brother. Second, to Miss Hermione Granger, for the use of cool logic in the face of fire, I award Gryffindor House 50 points. Hermione buried her face in her arms. Harry could see her shoulders shaking. Ron patted her back with the awkward tenderness of a boy who had recently learned that people were worth being gentle with. Third, to Mr. Harry Potter, for outstanding courage, exceptional character, and a demonstration of power and conviction that reminded an old man of what it truly means to protect those you care about, I award Gryffindor House 60 points. The math was simple. 312 plus 50 plus 50 plus 60 equaled 472. A tie. The room held its breath. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. Harry, watching him, thought, you showman, you absolute showman. And finally, it takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our friends. I therefore award 10 points to Mr. Neville Longbottom. 482. Gryffindor. The explosion of sound that followed was, by several accounts, the loudest the Great Hall had ever produced. The Gryffindor table became a mosh pit. Hats were thrown. Someone appended a pitcher of pumpkin juice. The Weasley twins were hugging everyone within reach. Neville, at the center of it all, was being mobbed by people who had never particularly noticed him before and were now treating him like a conquering hero. Harry watched Neville's face, the disbelief, the dawning wonder, the slow, incredible realization that he had mattered, that a moment of courage he'd thought was insignificant had been seen and valued and rewarded. The seed Harry had planted over breakfast was taking root in real time, and the boy who grew from it would be something remarkable. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy sat with his goblet still in his hand and his celebration frozen mid-cheer. He looked across the hall at Harry, and their eyes met, and the expression on Draco's face was not the fury or resentment Harry might have expected. It was something more complicated. Something that looked, if you squinted, like the first stirring of a question the boy had never thought to ask. What kind of person do I want to be? Harry raised his goblet to Draco, a slight gesture, an acknowledgement between two people who were not friends and might never be, but who had taken the first step toward seeing each other clearly. Draco hesitated, then barely, almost imperceptibly, he inclined his head. It was enough. The last morning arrived with the soft golden light of early summer, and Harry stood at the window of the dormitory and watched the sun rise over the Hogwarts grounds. The lake was a mirror of pink and gold. The forest was a dark line against the brightening sky. The castle's towers cast long shadows across the grass, and somewhere below, Hagrid was walking his usual morning patrol, his massive silhouette accompanied by the bounding shape of Fang. Harry had packed his trunk the night before, his books, his robes, his wand. Hedwig was in her cage, preening with the satisfied air of an owl who had enjoyed a productive year. The dormitory was quiet, Ron still asleep, Neville snoring gently, Seamus and Dean dead to the world. He'd had a year. 1 year at Hogwarts, and in that year he had done what he'd come to do. He had learned. Not just the magic, though he'd learned that too, absorbed it, analyzed it, identified its strengths and limitations. He'd learned the people, the politics, the power structures and hidden currents that shaped this world. He'd found friends, real friends, the kind who followed you into danger not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to. He'd faced the darkness and driven it back, and in doing so had announced his presence on the board in terms that could not be ignored, and he'd learned something about himself. Something that neither Gilgamesh nor Harry Potter had fully understood before this year. Something that could only be learned by sitting in a common room with a red-headed boy and a bushy-haired girl and feeling, for the first time in 5,000 years, like he belonged somewhere. Power was not the point, power was the instrument. The point, the whole point, the only point that mattered was the people you used it to protect. Gilgamesh had learned that lesson once at the cost of Enkidu's life. Harry was learning it again at the cost of nothing but pride. He considered this an improvement. The train ride south was long and warm and lazy. Harry shared a compartment with Ron and Hermione, and they talked and laughed and ate sweets and played exploding snap. And for a few hours, Harry let himself be an 11-year-old boy on a train with his friends, and the king inside him was quiet and content. Hermione laid out a summer research plan with the organizational intensity of a military campaign. Books to read, topics to investigate, letters to write. Ron groaned theatrically but agreed to all of it, which told Harry more about how much the boy had changed this year than any number of words could have. "We'll need to learn about Horcruxes," Hermione said, her voice low. "Everything we can find. If there are multiple, we need to understand how they work, how they're made, how they're destroyed." "Dumbledore and I will be working on that," Harry said, "but extra research never hurts. Just be careful what you put in writing. Some of this information is dangerous." "I know how to be discreet, Harry. I know you do. That's why I'm trusting you with it." She flushed slightly and looked out the window, and Ron caught Harry's eye and raised an eyebrow, and Harry responded with the faintest shake of his head, and all of this was conducted with the wordless efficiency of three people who had become fluent in each other's language. The English countryside rolled past, fields and hedgerows and little towns. The ordinary world going about its ordinary business, entirely unaware that a war was coming, that a broken monster was gathering strength in the shadows. That the only thing standing between the darkness and everything it wanted to devour was an old man with a phoenix, a bushy-haired girl with a book, a red-headed boy with a chessboard, and a king reborn in the body of a child. Harry watched the world go by and felt the weight of it, not as a burden but as a responsibility, a purpose. The thing that Gilgamesh had lacked in his first life, the thing that had driven him to seek immortality and ultimately to despair. A reason to fight that went beyond glory or fear or the desperate need to cheat death. People, the messy, complicated, infuriating, beautiful reality of people who depended on each other and were stronger for it. The train began to slow as it approached King's Cross. Students gathered their things, said their goodbyes, made their promises about the summer. Harry pulled his trunk from the rack and set Hedwig's cage on top of it and waited as the train pulled into the station. The platform was crowded with parents. Harry scanned the crowd and found what he expected, no one waiting for him. The Dursleys wouldn't come. They wouldn't even acknowledge the date. He'd take the underground to Surrey and walk from the station, and Petunia would open the door with her thin-lipped expression, and Vernon would pretend he didn't exist, and Dudley would avoid him with the instinctive caution of a prey animal that had learned to identify a predator. It didn't bother him, not really. He'd stopped needing the Dursleys' approval years ago, and the blood protection, for all its costs, was still necessary. Dumbledore was right about that much. As long as Voldemort existed in any form, the ancient magic anchored to Petunia's blood was a shield that Harry couldn't afford to abandon. Not yet, but one day. One day he would walk out of that house for the last time, and the cupboard under the stairs would be nothing but a memory, and the boy who had been locked inside it would be a man who had outgrown every cage the world had tried to build for him. One day, Ron's family was waiting in a cluster of red hair and warm smiles. Mrs. Weasley spotted Harry and immediately began pushing through the crowd toward him with the determination of a woman who had decided that this boy needed feeding and was not going to be deterred by minor obstacles like the laws of physics. "Harry, dear, you look peaky. Are you sure you're eating enough? You must come and stay this summer. Ron's told us all about you, and the twins won't stop talking about the Quidditch." "Thank you, Mrs. Weasley, I'd like that." She beamed. Ron shrugged with the embarrassed pleasure of someone whose mother was aggressively wonderful. Mr. Weasley, a thin, balding man with glasses and an expression of permanent, delighted curiosity, shook Harry's hand and asked him 3 questions about how plugs worked before his wife steered him away. Hermione found her parents, a pleasant, slightly bewildered-looking couple who were clearly still adjusting to the fact that their daughter was a witch, and waved to Harry across the platform. He waved back. Then he picked up his trunk, settled Hedwig on his shoulder, and walked toward the barrier. "Harry," he stopped, turned. Ron was standing a few feet away, having broken from his family. His ears were red. They always went red when he was about to say something sincere, which Ron considered a design flaw, and his hands were shoved in his pockets. "This year," Ron said, he took a breath. "You're the best mate I've ever had, and I know you're whatever you are. King of heroes, ancient soul, all of that, but you're also just Harry. And just Harry he's all right, more than all right, he's brilliant." Harry looked at his friend. This gangly, insecure, fiercely loyal boy who had followed him through a trapdoor and sacrificed himself on a chessboard and accepted the impossible truth about his identity with nothing more than right, cool, so what's the plan? Ron Weasley, who measured himself against his brothers and always found himself wanting, never seeing what Harry saw, that the courage to follow, to trust, to stand beside someone when the world turned dark, was as rare and as valuable as any crown. "Ron," Harry said, "you are worth 10 of anyone who's ever doubted you, including yourself." Ron's ears went nuclear. He opened his mouth, closed it, managed a nod that conveyed more emotion than a speech, and turned back to his family. Harry smiled, not the king's smile, the calculated expression of a ruler presenting himself to his subjects. Harry's smile, the real one. The one that reached his eyes and made him look, for just a moment, like exactly what he was. A boy at the end of his first year at school, saying goodbye to his best friend, looking forward to the summer, carrying inside him a weight that would have broken most people, but that he bore with grace and purpose and the hard-won wisdom of 5,000 years. He walked through the barrier. The magical world dissolved behind him, replaced by the noise and bustle of King's Cross Station, the ordinary world in all its oblivious glory. Commuters and tourists and business people rushing past without a second glance at the thin boy with the owl on his shoulder. Harry moved through them like water through stone, present but untouched, surrounded but apart. He walked through the station and out into the London afternoon, where the sun was bright and the air smelled of exhaust and distant rain, and the city sprawled around him in every direction, vast and indifferent and alive. He thought about the year behind him, the sorting, the troll, the mirror, the wraith, the golden gate opening in a ruined bathroom, the face on the back of a broken man's head. The sound of Ron's body hitting stone, Hermione's voice saying, "Come back," Dumbledore's hand across the desk, Neville's face when the points were announced. He thought about the years ahead. Horcruxes hidden across Britain, each one a fragment of a broken soul, each one a lock that needed to be found and opened and destroyed. Voldemort gathering strength in the darkness, patient and furious and inevitable. A war coming, slow as a glacier and just as unstoppable, and at the center of it, a boy who was not just a boy, carrying a treasury of legends and a grief that was older than history. He thought about Enkidu, the face in the mirror, the ache that never faded, and he thought about the future, not with dread or resignation, but with the steady, absolute certainty of someone who had already decided how the story would end. Not with his death, not with Voldemort's triumph, not with the darkness swallowing the world. The story would end the way he decided it would end. Because he was Harry Potter, and he was the king of heroes, and he had been fighting since the dawn of civilization, and he was not going to stop. The afternoon sun caught his scar and turned it silver for a moment, a thin line of light on his forehead, and then he shifted, and it was just a scar again, and he was just a boy again, walking through a crowd that didn't know his name. But the crowd parted for him anyway, unconsciously. The way crowds had always parted for him in this life and the one before, the way they always would. Harry Potter walked into the summer, and behind him the world held its breath. Somewhere far away in a forest, in a shadow, in the space between life and death where broken things went to hide, a wraith that had once been a man felt something it had not felt in a decade. Fear, not of the boy. Not of the scar, not of the prophecy, of the thing behind the boy's eyes, the golden light, the ancient weight, the absolute, unshakable, terrifying certainty of a king who had decided that this particular evil would not be allowed to endure. The wraith fled deeper into the darkness. It would not be deep enough.